A stranger walked up to me in the middle of a crowded restaurant, pressed a wooden box into my hands, and whispered 4 words that changed everything. Tonight, you'll need this. I didn't know his name. I didn't know why he chose me. And I had no idea that by the time I drove home that night, someone would be following me through the dark. My husband was sitting right there at that table, smiling, pouring wine, talking about our future. And the whole time, he was planning to end mine. What happens when the person who promised to love you forever becomes the greatest threat to your life? What do you do when the walls of your own home feel like a trap? This is the story of Rowan Clark, a woman who lost everything, uncovered a conspiracy buried inside her own family, and found the courage to fight back before it was too late. The lesson here is simple but powerful. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Don't silence that voice inside you. If this story gripped you in the first few seconds, imagine what the rest will do. Stay with us until the end, because this one doesn't end the way you think it will. And if you love stories that make you think, feel, and reflect on your own life, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe so you never miss a story that matters. This content was manually researched, developed, and edited by our team to bring you meaningful stories with real lessons you can carry into your own life.
What I'm about to share is a story I pieced together from a source, a harrowing account of a man named Ryan and the quiet nightmare he was building around his wife. It starts, as these things often do, in a perfectly normal place, a sunlit cafe. Madison, his wife, was sitting with him and her brother Tyler. The two men got up to handle the bill, and that's when everything changed. A stranger, a man with a haunted look in his eyes, walked straight up to Madison's table. He pressed a small wooden box into her hands, whispering, "Don't sign anything. Don't trust them. You'll need this tonight." And just like that, he was gone. Madison, stunned, slipped the box into her purse just as Ryan returned. A wide salesman's smile stretched across his face that never quite touched his eyes. From what she told me, you could feel that something was fundamentally broken in that moment. Later that evening, they were at an upscale wine bar, and the air was thick with unspoken things. Madison said she could practically see the lies forming on her husband's lips. Ryan leaned in close, his voice a soft, concerned murmur, saying things like, "Madison, honey, I hate seeing you so exhausted. The vineyard is just too much for you." He was carefully painting a picture, you see, crafting a narrative where she was fragile, overwhelmed, a woman in desperate need of a man to save her from her own life. It's a textbook case of control, as ugly as they come. She just clutched her wine glass, trying to hold herself together. But Ryan kept pushing, placing his hand over hers with a practiced gentleness. He told her she was a teacher at heart, not some cutthroat executive, that her father never intended for her to carry the burden of the entire vineyard alone. It's okay to let it go, he cooed. But this place wasn't just a business. It was 50 acres of her family's soul, her father's entire legacy, the only thing he'd built after her mother passed. It was her history. And Ryan, the man who had vowed to protect her, was telling her to simply throw it all away. Then he named his price, $8.5 million. He whispered it like a secret, a fantasy of a house on the coast, endless travel, a life free from stress, a life where they could finally breathe. It sounded like a dream, didn't it? But Madison pulled her hand back, and for a fleeting, almost imperceptible second, she saw the mask slip. Ryan's jaw clenched with a flash of anger before that hollow smile snapped back into place. Across the table, her brother Tyler, who had been a silent statue all night, finally spoke, his eyes fixed on her, watching her every move. A little background I dug up on Tyler. When their father passed away 4 years ago, Madison inherited the vineyard. Tyler was given $500,000 in cash, a sum he managed to burn through in less than 2 years. He was desperate. And now, his voice chimed in, rough and insistent, telling Madison that Ryan was right, that she was drowning and about to lose everything anyway. But she held her ground, her voice steady when she told them she wasn't selling. That's when Tyler's eyes went flat and cold as he hissed, "Loyal to what? A dead man?" That was the final straw. Madison told me she felt the room closing in, and muttering that she needed some air, she bolted from the table. Ryan called after her, a fake note of concern in his voice, but she was already through the door. The parking lot behind the bar was a pool of darkness, lit by a single flickering street lamp. She'd always parked in the shadowed corners, thinking it was safer. Tonight, that feeling was gone. She stopped short. A primal instinct screamed at her. Someone was out there, watching her. A man she didn't recognize was standing in the gloom. She spun around, seeing only the glint of metal on empty cars. And then she saw him, a tall figure in a denim jacket, standing right at the edge of the lamp's weak light, perfectly still. Just watching. She called out, trying to inject a strength into her voice that she didn't feel, but got only silence in return. She started backing toward her car, her keys clenched in her fist. Then he took a step forward, and her heart seized in her chest. She turned and ran, fumbling with the lock, finally yanking the door open. But then a rough voice cut through the night. "Wait." He stopped several feet away, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. In the dim light, she could finally make out his face. He was older, maybe in his late 60s, with tired eyes that burned with a desperate urgency. He told her his name was Michael, that he wasn't going to hurt her. But then, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, polished walnut box. He told her he had something for her. Terrified, she insisted she didn't know him, and he replied, "I know, but I know your husband, and I know what he's planning." Then, Michael delivered the words that would shatter her entire world. "Your husband is planning to kill you. I can't even begin to imagine it." Hearing that, your reality just splintering on the cracked asphalt of a dark parking lot. She told him he was crazy, but her voice trembled, betraying her. Michael just held out the box, telling her to open it when she was alone and to trust absolutely no one. Not Ryan, not even her own brother. Before she could form a single thought, he placed the box on the roof of her car and melted back into the shadows. She snatched it, threw herself inside, slammed the locks, and stomped on the gas, her hands shaking too violently to properly grip the steering wheel. She didn't dare look at the box. She just drove, her eyes glued to the rearview mirror, as she fled into the night. And then, a knot of ice formed in her stomach. Headlights. A black sedan was behind her, matching her every move. She floored it. It sped up. She wrenched the wheel, flying down a dark gravel road, the sedan sticking to her bumper. After a series of panicked turns down a deserted access road, she risked another look. It was gone. But Michael's words were now a permanent echo in her mind. "Your husband is planning to kill you." By the time she pulled up to the house she shared with Ryan, she was a wreck. The building was dark, but for the first time, it felt truly menacing. She ran inside, slammed the door, and threw the deadbolt, her back pressed against the wood as she gasped for air. Then, in a frantic attempt to chase away the shadows, she moved through the house, turning on every single light she could find. But she was beginning to understand that the real darkness wasn't something she could keep outside. It had been living in her home all along. She finally collapsed at her kitchen table, the wooden box sitting in front of her. It was a beautiful walnut case, and carved into the lid were the words, "Truth will prevail, 2024. Taking a shuddering breath, she lifted the lid. Inside lay 3 items: a simple gold wedding band, a tiny micro SD card, and a single, folded piece of paper. The contents of a life she no longer recognized. Everything she would need. She somehow knew to uncover the truth about her husband, Ryan. It was the wedding band that made her breath catch in her throat. It was Ryan's, the one he claimed he never, ever took off. She picked it up. It felt strangely heavy in her palm. As she turned it over and over, her thumb traced the engraving inside. Forever, M and R. And then she felt it, a tiny, almost invisible seam along the inner edge. With a press of her nail, the ring twisted and popped open. It was a trick ring, a locket, designed to hold the darkest secrets of her marriage. Tucked into that impossibly small compartment was the SD card, and beneath it, the folded note. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely unfold the paper. The letter was from Michael, the man from the parking lot, and the first line turned her entire world on its head. It read, "Dear Madison, my name is Michael. I am Ryan's father." He went on to explain that 35 years ago, he had walked out on his family, and for the last 3 years, in a desperate act of penance, he'd been working at her vineyard just to be close to the son he'd abandoned. Not as a father, but as a ghost, an anonymous handyman, completely invisible to his own child. The story Michael laid out in that letter. It began with a father trying to believe his son could be redeemed. He thought Ryan was finally straightening out his life. But on September 23rd, 2022, that fragile hope was obliterated. Michael had been working late, fixing a faulty irrigation line, when he heard shouting from the wine cellar. He crept down the stone steps, hiding behind a row of old barrels, and saw his son, Ryan, and his friend Tyler backing a young vineyard hand, a kid named Ethan Miller, into a corner. Ethan was begging for his life, pleading that he had a wife and a new baby girl. And then Ryan, he just lifted a crowbar and brought it down. Twice. Michael recorded the entire horrific act on his phone, but he was paralyzed by the horror of it. That was his boy. How do you condemn your own son to die in a prison cell? For 2 years, he told himself that maybe Tyler had been the one to push him, that Ryan had been manipulated. He turned into a private detective in his own life, secretly recording conversations and taking pictures, desperately searching for any piece of evidence that might paint his son as a victim, something that could earn him a lighter sentence. But 3 months ago, that last ember of hope was extinguished. He overheard Ryan on the phone with Tyler, calmly plotting to murder his own wife, Madison. "I'll do it myself," Ryan said. "A car accident. Clean. I get everything. 8.5 million from the vineyard sale, plus another 3 million from her life insurance. Enough to pay you off and start a new life with Chloe." Ryan wasn't a victim. He was a monster. And in that one sickening moment, Michael knew he couldn't save his son, but he could still save Madison. His letter concluded with a declaration that was both heartbreaking and resolute. "I will not fail as a human being. Ethan Miller's daughter will grow up without a father because of my son. I won't let another person die. He urged her to contact an FBI agent named Avery Jensen, even providing the phone number 4015-5555-0147. Give her the SD card. Testify. Survive. Madison told me she had to read that letter 3 times before the words sank in. Michael, Ryan's father. Her husband was a murderer, a man with a family, and now he was coming for her next. Her entire world tilted violently, and she said she had to grab the edge of the kitchen sink, her knuckles turning white as she fought to stay upright. She fought down the wave of nausea, and when she could finally trust her legs again, she went back for the SD card. Her laptop was on the kitchen counter. She sat down, her hand shaking, and slid the card into the slot. A single folder appeared on the screen, labeled simply for Madison. Inside were dozens of files. She checked the folder's properties: 47 audio files, 89 photographs, and 12 videos. A complete damning archive of her husband's secret, monstrous life. A part of her, she confessed, wanted to slam the laptop shut, to shatter it, and pretend none of this was real. But she couldn't. Her finger hovered over the mouse for a long moment, and then she clicked on the very first video, time-stamped just 1 month ago. I pieced this first part together from a source close to the investigation, describing a video that changed everything for a man named Ryan. The clip was shot on a hidden camera, tucked away in what looked like a dusty old supply room. In it, his wife, Madison, was talking with a man he recognized as their friend Tyler. The audio was distorted, but their words cut through the static with terrifying clarity. Tyler confirmed the details. The contact is solid. 200 million, Thursday, October 19th, Oakland Port, Pier 47. Madison just gave a slow, deliberate nod, completely unfazed. Excellent, but Ryan is getting suspicious. He saw the truck last week. If he starts asking questions... Tyler's response was immediate and chilling. Then, we'll take care of him, just like we took care of Ethan. Madison agreed without a flicker of emotion. A car accident. Highway 29, mile marker 52. I'll handle the brake line Wednesday night. He'll be gone by Friday. Just then, the recording ended, leaving Ryan staring into the reflection of his own horrified face on the dark screen. He told me it was like his soul had left his body. The woman he loved was planning to execute him. Not abstractly, not down the line, but this week, in just 2 days. With a trembling hand, he opened the next file. This video was different, recorded just yesterday. A man he knew, a longtime vineyard worker named Mark, stared into the camera, his face shadowed by a single lamp, his voice a desperate whisper. Ryan, if you're seeing this, it means you got my letter. I know this is impossible to process, but listen. You have no time left. Tonight, at precisely 11:47 p.m., you need to get to the wine cellar. The security system has a 3-minute blind spot as it switches between feeds. That's your window, your only one. Get to row 7. You're looking for bottle 217, a 1996 Chateau Margaux. Twist it clockwise? Mark's voice urged from the screen. 3 complete turns, you'll understand. He explained that Madison and Tyler were using the family vineyard for something monstrous, and the evidence was hidden down there. Put your trust in Agent Sarah Jennings. Her number is with the letter. She'll keep you safe. I'm so sorry, Ryan. Please just make it out alive. The video went black. Ryan glanced at the time glowing on his laptop. 11:32 p.m. He had 15 minutes. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. There was no room for denial, no moment to call the police and try to explain. If Mark was right, this was his one and only chance. He had to move. Right now. He snatched his phone and bolted for the cellar door. 11:47 p.m. He had 180 seconds to find row 7 before the cameras blinked back to life. The cellar was bitingly cold, the air thick with the scent of damp soil and aging oak. He gripped the cold iron railing, his footsteps echoing on the stone stairs as his phone's flashlight beams sliced nervously through the gloom. The single bare bulb overhead did little to illuminate the maze of wine racks stretching into the darkness. His own grandfather had designed this cellar, poured his heart into it. Now, walking through it felt like descending into a tomb. He forced his legs to move. Row 7, bottle 217. The scale of the place was overwhelming, lined with what had to be thousands of bottles. He scanned the small handwritten labels, his breath turning to mist in the frigid air. Row 1, 2, 3. 11:48 p.m. He was sure his heart was about to give out. 120 seconds remaining. Row 4, 5, 6. And then he saw it. Row 7. His light trembled as it swept across the bottles, his hands shaking so violently he could hardly focus on the numbers. 215, 216, there. Bottle 217, a 1996 Chateau Margaux, 11:49 p.m., 60 seconds. The label was faded and peeling, the dark glass coated in a thick film of dust. He remembered Mark's instructions. Turn it clockwise, 3 full rotations. He grasped the neck of the bottle and twisted. It moved, but not smoothly. It made a strange, mechanical grinding sound. This wasn't the simple friction of glass against wood. This was machinery. He twisted it a second time. The grinding grew louder, punctuated by a faint clicking that seemed to come from deep inside the wall. A third rotation. A heavy clunk echoed through the cellar, and he recoiled, his heart slamming into his throat. For a long second, nothing happened. And then a segment of the stone wall behind the wine rack began to groan and slide sideways. He stood there, frozen in disbelief, as a hidden door, crafted to look like solid rock, scraped its way open. It exposed a slim, pitch-black corridor. A blast of cold air rushed out, carrying a harsh chemical odor that stung his nostrils. He raised his phone, using the flashlight to peer into the oppressive darkness. The passage was narrow, maybe 3 feet across, constructed from rough, old-world brick. He recognized it immediately from the town's history archives. It was a prohibition tunnel. Bootleggers had riddled the Napa Hills with them back in the 1920s. But what in the world was it doing on his family's property? Every nerve ending screamed at him to turn back, to run. But Mark's grave warning played over and over in his mind. He checked his phone, 11:50 p.m. The cameras were active again. He could just make out the quiet whir of the system resetting. It didn't matter. They couldn't see him now. He was already inside, beyond their gaze. Taking a ragged breath, he stepped into the darkness. The tunnel was suffocatingly small and low-ceilinged. He had to stoop as he moved forward, keeping one hand on the damp, cold brick to guide himself. His flashlight beam was swallowed by the darkness just a few yards ahead. The chemical smell grew stronger with each step, a sharp mix of what smelled like ink and industrial solvents. After about 50 feet, the cramped passageway opened up into a much larger space. He stopped cold, sweeping the beam of light across the room, and the breath hitched in his throat. The chamber was immense, carved directly out of the bedrock with a high, arched ceiling. But it wasn't the size of the room that made him freeze in place. It was the contents. In the center of the cavern sat a colossal, industrial-grade offset printing press, its steel frame glinting in the narrow beam of his light. This was no hobbyist machine. This was the kind of equipment used by governments. Next to it were huge stacks of specialized paper, a cotton linen blend he realized with a wave of nausea. The exact kind the Treasury used for American currency. And then his light found them. Wooden pallets piled high with shrink-wrapped bricks of cash, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of counterfeit $100 bills. The scope of the betrayal, he told me, was dizzying. His wife was running a professional counterfeiting ring right beneath their home. He said his legs felt like they might buckle as he stumbled toward a battered metal desk in the corner. He flipped open a dusty ledger, his pulse pounding in his ears. Every transaction was meticulously recorded: dates, print runs, delivery coordinates. The handwriting was Madison's, small, neat, and perfect. And a single name appeared again and again: Hayes. At the top of the most recent page, scrawled in bold letters, Connor Hayes. Total production value, $47 million in 36 months. Then he saw the next entry: a new shipment for $200 million, scheduled to leave Oakland Port in just 4 days. His hands were shaking too badly to hold his phone steady. Of course, there was no service down here, but he could still take pictures. He needed to get proof. He started taking frantic photos of everything: the hulking press, the stacks of uncut currency paper, the pallets of finished bills, and every single page of that ledger. He knew most of the images would be a blurry mess from his trembling hands, but he couldn't stop. He just kept tapping the screen, a desperate need to document this insanity driving him. And that's when he heard it: footsteps. He froze, his thumb hovering over the camera icon. The sound was distant at first, but it was unmistakably footsteps, echoing from deeper within the tunnel network, not from the direction he had come. There was another way in. Then he heard voices, low and indistinct, but drawing closer. A wave of pure, cold terror washed over him. He shoved the phone into his jeans and spun around, his flashlight beam dancing wildly across the damp stone walls. There was nowhere to go. He was trapped. He needed a hiding place, anything: a dark alcove, a space behind a crate. And then a voice floated out of the darkness that turned his blood to ice, a voice he knew better than his own. Madison. It was his wife. She was saying, "I'm telling you, he's been asking too many questions. If he ever finds this place..." Then a man's voice answered. "Just relax," the man said. "He's probably upstairs, sound asleep. You're getting paranoid." "I'm not paranoid," Madison shot back, her voice sharp. "I'm being careful." They were close now, maybe 20 feet away. Ryan's eyes darted around the chamber and fixed on an air duct grate, high on the far wall. It was small and covered in rust, but it was ajar. It was his only chance. He stopped thinking and just moved. There was a large wooden shipping crate nearby, stenciled with foreign lettering. He dragged the crate across the concrete floor toward the wall, the scraping sound echoing like a thunderclap in the silent chamber. He flinched at the noise, then scrambled on top of it. The vent was still just beyond his grasp. He had to jump, his fingers barely snagging the sharp metal ledge. With his arms burning from the strain, he heaved himself up and squeezed his body through the narrow opening. The duct was pitch black and frigid. He crawled forward a few feet, just enough to be out of view, and pressed himself flat against the cold metal floor. Below, the voices grew louder as Madison and a man he now recognized as their neighbor, Tyler, entered the main chamber. Ryan held his breath, willing himself to become invisible, and peered down at them through the slats of the grate. Madison stood with her hands on her hips, surveying the room like a monarch inspecting her domain. Tyler walked straight to the desk and began flipping through the same ledger Ryan had been photographing only moments before. A single exposed light bulb hanging from a wire cast long, grotesque shadows across their faces. Ryan didn't dare to breathe. The duct was painfully tight, the cold steel leaching the warmth from his body. His phone, holding all the evidence he needed, felt like a block of ice against his leg. He was petrified they would look up, that they would notice the freshly moved crate, but their attention was fixed on the book. "Everything is proceeding on schedule," Tyler announced, closing the ledger with a snap. His voice bounced off the stone walls. "Hayes called an hour ago. The buyers are all confirmed." It all started with a number, whispered in the dark of a place that shouldn't have existed. 200 million. Thursday night. Oakland Port. That's what a source tells me the man named Tyler confirmed. And Madison, the woman who was supposed to be the love of Ryan's life, just nodded. "Good," she said, her voice betraying nothing. "We're cutting it close, but we'll make it." When Tyler asked about transport, she was all business. "Victor's coordinating," she told him. "Container leaves at midnight Friday. It'll be halfway to St. Petersburg before anyone notices." That's when it hit Ryan, huddled in the darkness above them. Russia. This wasn't some local scam. This was global. And then Tyler asked the question that stopped Ryan's heart. "And Ryan?" Madison's face hardened. "He's a problem. I told you he'd refuse to sell the vineyard." "I know," Tyler conceded. But Madison's voice turned sharp, laced with a chilling frustration. "I thought I could convince him," she spat. "I thought if I just played the concerned wife long enough, he'd cave. But he's stubborn, just like his father was." Tyler just scoffed. Daniel was a pain in the ass, too. At least he had the decency to die before he could find this place. Ryan had to physically stifle a cry. They were talking about his father, a man he idolized, as if he were just an obstacle that had conveniently removed itself. "Ryan's not gonna sell," Madison said, her pacing cutting through the silence. "Which means we move to Plan B." Tyler's casual posture vanished. "You sure? That's a big step." "It's the only step," she shot back, turning to face him. "We can't afford to wait." "If he starts digging, if he talks to the wrong people, this whole operation falls apart. Logan won't hesitate to kill us both. You know that." I'm told Tyler went quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "What do you want to do?" Madison didn't answer right away. She walked over to a pallet stacked high with cash, stroking the plastic wrap as if it were a pet. "The same thing we did with Michael Peterson." The name sent a wave of ice through Ryan's veins. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "Madison, you remember?" Her voice was eerily calm, almost conversational. "September 2022. Michael was working late, restocking the main cellar. He saw someone come down here. He followed them. He found the press." "I remember," Tyler whispered. Madison turned back to him, her eyes vacant. "He was going to call the cops, so I hit him. Twice. With that crowbar we use on the crates." She made a small, terrible motion with her arm, miming the swing. "First hit, he went down. Second hit, he stopped moving." Ryan clamped his hand over his mouth, the metallic taste of panic flooding his senses. Detective Hayes buried it as a workplace accident. Madison continued, her tone matter of fact. Ruled it a fall. No autopsy. Case closed in 48 hours. Logan paid him $87,000 to make sure it stayed that way. Tyler rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit. And you want to do the same thing with Ryan? Not the same, she corrected. Different method. She pulled out her phone. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m., I'll tell him I need to talk, that I want to apologize for pressuring him. I'll suggest we go for a drive, just us. The plot was laid out with a terrifying clarity. We'll take Highway 29 north to mile marker 52. There's a sharp curve there, a steep drop-off. Brake failure, Tyler guessed, his voice hollow. Exactly, Madison confirmed with a thin smile. I'll cut the brake line before we leave. By the time we hit that curve, he won't be able to stop. The car goes over the side. He'll be dead before they find him. And I'll be the grieving widow who barely survived. Tyler just stared at her. You've really thought this through. I've had 2 years to think about it, she said softly. Madison pocketed her phone. Ever since Michael, I knew Ryan would eventually become a problem. I just didn't think it would be this soon. After he's gone, I get everything. The vineyard, the house, the $3 million life insurance policy. I sell this place to Logan's shell company, get a $2 million kickback, and I'm gone. Costa Rica, maybe. Tyler hesitated for a second. What about Ashley? A slow, cruel smile crept across Madison's face. Ashley comes with me. She's already filed for divorce from her husband. By the time Ryan's funeral is over, we'll be on a beach somewhere. Ryan's world tilted on its axis. He couldn't get enough air into his lungs. The tiny duct felt like a coffin. Madison glanced at her watch. Come on, she urged. We need to get back upstairs before anyone notices we were gone. Tyler nodded, and they moved toward the other side of the massive chamber, toward a second tunnel entrance Ryan hadn't even seen. Madison flipped a switch, and the world went black. Ryan heard the solid clang of a heavy door, followed by a profound, suffocating silence. He stayed wedged in that duct, frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs. He counted to 60, then did it again, his muscles screaming in protest. Every fiber of his being was electrified with terror. Only when he was certain they were truly gone did he inch his way backward, dropping with a soft thud onto the crate below. His legs gave out the moment his feet touched the concrete. He braced himself against a crate, his body racked with uncontrollable tremors in the pitch-black room. He fumbled for his phone, the flashlight beam cutting a frantic path through the darkness as he ran. The tunnel felt endless, the shadows closing in. He stumbled twice, his breathing ragged and raw. When he finally burst back into the wine cellar, he slammed the hidden panel shut, the grinding sound of old machinery echoing behind him. But he didn't stop. He scrambled up the stairs, tore through the kitchen, and didn't stop until he was in his bedroom. He threw the bolt on the door and collapsed, sliding down to the floor, his back pressed hard against the wood. The phone was still gripped in his hand, its screen casting a pale, lonely light in the room. His wife was going to murder him tomorrow night. At 8 p.m., he had less than 24 hours to live. His fingers trembled as he scrolled through his contacts. A letter his Uncle Mark had left him insisted that if he was ever in deep, inescapable trouble, he was to call FBI Agent Sullivan. The number was seared into his memory, 415-555-147. He stared at it, his thumb hovering over the call icon. It was 1 a.m. Would anyone even pick up? Would they believe him, or just dismiss him as another paranoid spouse? But what choice did he have? Madison had already murdered once. He knew with absolute certainty that he was next. He had to make the call. This is the part of the story that always gets me. The moment a life pivots on a single terrifying decision. He was certain his wife was going to kill him, and he knew that if he didn't find the courage to act, if he didn't press that button, he would never see the sun rise. He took a shuddering breath and hit send. The phone rang once, twice. His hand was shaking so violently the device nearly fell from his grasp. He was still on the floor, huddled against the locked door. The phone screen the only thing illuminating his face. The old house groaned around him, a sound he'd never found menacing until now. 3 rings. What if the number was dead? Then, a click. Agent Sullivan. The voice was calm, professional, and blessedly awake. It was a woman's voice, carrying an authority that immediately cut through his panic. It was the voice of someone who had heard it all and knew precisely what to do next. Ryan opened his mouth, but the words were caught in his throat, choked by terror. "Hello?" Agent Sullivan repeated. "Is someone there?" He finally forced the words out, a raw, broken whisper. "My name is Ryan. My Uncle Mark. He told me to call you. My wife, she's planning to kill me." A brief, charged silence hung between them. Then, the words that changed everything. "Mr. Miller, we've been waiting for your call." The relief was so sudden and overwhelming, it felt like a physical blow, nearly bringing him to his knees. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't alone. Someone believed him. Agent Sullivan's tone remained steady, but Ryan could hear a new urgency in it. "Your uncle provided us with some initial intelligence on your wife's associates. We've had Madison and her crew under light surveillance for a while now, but we needed something concrete. We needed you." Ryan's voice cracked as he relayed the horrifying details. "She's going to kill me tomorrow night, 8 p.m., Highway 29, mile marker 52. She's going to cut the brake line on the car, make it look like an accident." "How do you know this?" Sullivan asked, her voice sharp. And then it all came pouring out. The suspicions, the hidden door behind the wine rack, the tunnel, the entire underground counterfeiting operation, and the impossible sum of money. And then he told her about hiding in that air duct, listening as Madison, his Madison, and Tyler planned his murder with all the emotion of scheduling a dentist appointment. Agent Sullivan listened without interruption. All Ryan could hear on the other end was the quiet, rapid-fire tapping of a keyboard, the sound of his nightmare becoming an official federal case. When he finally stopped, gasping for breath, the line was silent for a beat. "Mr. Miller," Sullivan finally said, "you've just given us everything we need. Did you happen to see anything else? Any documents? Ledgers?" "Yes," Ryan whispered, remembering a book on a desk. "I saw a ledger with a name in it. Logan." "Good. Don't go back down there. Don't let her know you suspect anything. Just act normal. We'll handle it from here." It all started with a phone call, a lifeline thrown into the dark. That's what my source told me. On the other end was a federal agent, a man named Davis, and his instructions were chillingly clear. "Get the memory card, your phone, anything that guy Tyler gave you," he'd said. She could only nod, a gesture lost over the line. "Madison, you have to listen to me." His voice sharpened, stripping away any sense of comfort. "You can't tell anyone, not a single person, not your brother, not your parents. If your husband Ryan suspects for a second that you know, he'll act tonight. He won't wait." She said her stomach felt like a block of ice. "What am I supposed to do?" "Be normal," Davis had ordered. "Go to sleep. Pretend today is just another Tuesday. If Ryan talks to you, be polite, but keep up that wall you've had since this vineyard disaster started. Don't give him any reason to think something's changed. But what if he finds out? She started to ask, the words catching in her throat. Agent Davis cut her off, his tone firm. We'll have a unit outside your house by 6 in the morning, he promised. Unmarked vans, guys dressed like contractors, you won't see them, but they'll be there. If Ryan makes a single move before you leave for the city, my team will intervene. It was meant to be reassuring, but all Madison could picture was Ryan's face in that dark, damp cellar, talking about cutting her brake lines with the same casual tone he used to order his morning latte. And when I get there, she asked, her voice shaking, we'll take your official statement, review all the evidence you have, and then we make our move. We'll issue warrants for Ryan, his partner Blake, and every last person involved in this entire counterfeit ring. But it all hinges on you, the agent had stressed. We need your testimony officially recorded. Without it, Ryan's lawyers will tear this apart and claim the evidence was fabricated. You're the piece that connects everything, Madison. You're the witness that makes this case untouchable. She told me the weight of it felt physical, like the ceiling was pressing down on her. She was the star witness. The words from her mouth would be what locked away the man she'd married for the rest of his natural life. The very same man who had already admitted to killing someone named Michael Torres. And was now planning to kill her. I'll be there, she managed to say, her voice just a whisper. Good, Davis replied. I'll see you at 9. And Madison, he added, pausing for effect. I know this is terrifying, but you did the right thing. You're going to be okay, I promise. She desperately wanted to believe him. Thank you, was all she could whisper back. Try to get some rest. Then the line went dead. For a long moment, Madison just sat in the silence, the phone still pressed against her cheek. Finally, she lowered it, curling into a ball on the floor. Act normal. Go to bed. How could anyone sleep, knowing that just down the hall, her husband was possibly lying awake, dreaming of ways to make her disappear? She forced herself onto trembling legs, the adrenaline making her feel shaky and weak. She climbed into bed fully clothed, pulling the blankets up to her chin like a shield. The only light came from the faint red numbers on the alarm clock, 1:47 in the morning. She stared up into the darkness, her ears straining, turning every small noise into a sign of danger. The house groaning, the wind rattling a window, a floorboard creaking from downstairs. Was that Ryan? Was he coming for her? Did he somehow know she'd found his secret? Did he know she'd just been on the phone with the FBI? She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting for every breath. The agents would be here at 6 a.m. That's what she kept telling herself. Just a little over 4 hours. She just had to survive for 4 more hours. She must have drifted into a state of exhausted delirium, because the next thing she knew, she was sitting bolt upright, her heart pounding against her ribs. The clock now read 3:02 a.m. A noise had jolted her awake, a noise from just outside. She held her breath, listening intently. There it was again, the low rumble of a car engine idling directly outside her bedroom window. Moving as quietly as a ghost, she slipped out of bed, carefully navigating the floor to avoid the boards that always squeaked. She pulled back the curtain, just a tiny fraction of an inch. A black sedan was parked at the curb, no more than 30 feet from her driveway. Its headlights were off, but she could see the soft red glow of its taillights. And she could see a figure inside. It was just a dark shape, but then a tiny point of orange light flared, the tip of a cigarette. Someone was in that car, watching her house. Her throat went dry. Was it one of Ryan's men? Or maybe someone from the people he was involved with, making sure she didn't try to run? The car sat there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute. Her knuckles were white from gripping the curtain. Then, without warning, the headlights flashed on. The car shifted into reverse, backed silently down the street, and disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. She let the curtain fall, stumbling back toward the bed, her legs barely holding her up. Someone knew. Someone was watching. After that, sleep was no longer an option. By 7 o'clock, she was dressed and packed, her hands still trembling as she put the SD card and her phone deep inside her purse. She tried to reason with herself, telling herself that the car was just a coincidence. A late-night visitor on the wrong street, a driver who was lost. But in her gut, she knew that wasn't true. She used the back door, unwilling to risk walking past the front of the house where Ryan might see her from their bedroom. Her little Subaru was sitting in the driveway, covered in a thin layer of dew. She jumped in, slammed the locks, and peeled away from the curb. The drive into San Francisco was supposed to take 90 minutes, but that morning it stretched into an eternity. Every car in her rearview mirror felt like a threat, every pair of headlights a potential pursuer. But that black sedan never reappeared. By the time she finally pulled into a parking garage near the FBI headquarters on Golden Gate Avenue, her hands were cramping from how tightly she'd been gripping the steering wheel. The building was an imposing fortress of concrete and tinted glass, marked only by a small, unassuming plaque. She stepped through the revolving doors and approached a security desk, where a grim-faced officer checked her ID before making a call. "Mrs. Miller," he said flatly, "someone is on their way down." She waited in the cold, silent lobby, her heart hammering against her ribs, until an elevator chimed and a woman emerged. Agent Davis was exactly as Madison had pictured. Late 40s, with short, practical gray hair and eyes that seemed to see right through you. She wore a dark blazer with her FBI badge clipped to her belt. "Mrs. Miller," she said, extending a hand. Her handshake was firm, confident. "Thank you for coming." Madison could only nod, afraid her voice would betray her fear. Davis led her into the elevator and up to the fourth floor, then down a long hallway of identical doors, until they reached a conference room at the very end. A man was already inside, his laptop open. "This is Agent Miller," Davis said, shutting the door behind them. "He's our lead tech analyst." Miller, a man in his early 40s with salt and pepper hair and thin glasses, looked up from his screen. "Mrs. Miller," he said with a quiet empathy, "we're deeply sorry you're in this situation." Madison didn't know how to reply, so she just gave a slight nod and took a seat. Agent Davis sat across from her, her expression all business. "I know this is overwhelming, Madison, but I need you to tell us everything from the very beginning. Start with the box." And so she did. She told them about Tyler showing up out of the blue, handing her that simple wooden box containing an old ring and the tiny memory card, the key that unlocked her husband's entire secret world. She described finding the hidden wine cellar and the staggering sight of the counterfeiting operation. $47 million in fraudulent bills just stacked on wooden pallets. Then, her voice breaking, she told them about the air duct and the absolute horror of listening to Ryan and Blake calmly plan her murder. When Madison finally finished, the two agents, Miller and Davis, exchanged a look that spoke volumes. "This is what we've been working toward," Davis said, her voice low. She carefully took the SD card from Madison's hand and inserted it into Miller's laptop. "This is the final piece." The computer made a small sound as a single folder appeared on the screen. Agent Miller's eyes darted across the contents as he clicked it open. There were 47 audio clips, 89 photos, and 12 different video files. He looked from the screen to Davis. "We have enough here to indict Blake Clark for murder one, counterfeiting, conspiracy, half a dozen other felonies." Davis then turned her focus back to Madison. "You've given us the physical proof, but we still need you. You're the only one who saw the operation firsthand. You're the one who heard Blake confess to murdering Michael Torres." Madison swallowed hard, the lump in her throat feeling like a stone. "So, what's the next step?" she asked. Just then, her phone vibrated on the conference table. She looked down and saw a text from a number she hadn't seen in years. It was her half-sister, Jessica. The message sent a fresh wave of fear through her. "I have to talk to you about Blake. I can't hide this anymore." Agent Davis's eyes narrowed instantly. "Who is that from?" "My sister," Madison stammered. "My half-sister, Jessica." Davis leaned over, her eyes scanning the text on the screen. "Does she know what Blake and Ryan are planning to do?" I have no idea. We haven't really talked since our father passed away." Davis straightened up, her demeanor shifting into high gear. "Call her back. Tell her to meet us immediately." "Meet us where?" "We'll dispatch a car. Tell her to stay put at her apartment. And don't say anything else over the phone." Madison's fingers trembled as she typed her reply. "Where are you? The FBI needs to talk to you." I'm told the 3 dots on the screen felt like an eternity for Madison. Then, a message from her sister finally came through. "I'm at home. Please, Madison, I'm so scared." By then, Agent Miller was already barking orders into her own phone. "Get a team to Ashley Gray's address. I want her at the Napa safe house. No lights, no sirens, just get it done." Hanging up, her attention snapped back to Madison. "We're moving both of you. If your sister knows what we think she knows, we need to hear it before Ryan figures out his entire world is about to burn." 2 hours later, they were holed up in a nondescript ranch house on the outskirts of Napa, surrounded by endless fields. The inside was forgettable. Beige walls, functional furniture, and heavy curtains sealing them off from the world. A pair of agents stood watch outside. Then, headlights cut through the dark as a sedan arrived, and Ashley stumbled out. When she stepped into the sterile light of the house, Madison barely recognized her own sister. Ashley looked hollowed out, her face pale and tracked with tears, her eyes red and raw. She was drowning in a pair of jeans and a baggy sweater, her hair a tangled mess. "Madison," she breathed, and the name itself sounded like it might break. Madison, I was told, was frozen, unable to find a single word. Agent Miller simply gestured toward the kitchen table. "Miss Gray, please sit down." Ashley complied, her hands shaking as she folded them in her lap. The silence that followed was heavy, a physical weight in the room, and then it shattered. "I owe Ryan money," Ashley said, her voice splintering. $150,000? I took it in 2021 to launch a real estate venture. It went under in 2022. The tears started falling freely now. "He threatened me. He told me if I didn't pay him back, he'd turn me into the IRS. I lied on my income for the loan application," she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. It's a federal offense. He said I'd face 5 years in prison. Agent Miller's expression, I'm told, was unreadable, like stone. And he made me spy on you, Ashley admitted, her eyes finally finding Madison's. For 2 years. He had me report on everything. Your schedule, who you called, what your email said. He needed to know every single move you made. I swear I didn't want to, Madison. I was just so terrified. Agent Miller's voice cut through the confession, sharp and precise. Last night, did Ryan get in touch with you? Ashley nodded, wiping at her face. He called me at midnight. He said, tomorrow night, 8 p.m., Highway 29, car accident. Keep your mouth shut, or you'll be going to prison right along with me. Her gaze locked on Madison's, her voice breaking. I knew what he was planning. He was going to have you killed, Ashley sobbed. And if I told anyone, he was going to ruin my life. The room fell into a dead silence, punctuated only by Ashley's ragged breaths. Agent Miller leaned in. Miss Gray, you've just confessed to bank fraud, tax evasion, and obstructing a federal investigation. You're realistically looking at 10 to 15 years. Ashley's face went chalk white. But Miller wasn't finished. However, should you choose to cooperate, testify against Ryan, provide us with all related evidence, and sign an agreement, the U.S. Attorney is prepared to recommend a significantly reduced sentence. 6 years, with parole eligibility after 4. Ashley just stared, speechless. 6 years? You're still going to do time, Miller stated, offering no false comfort. But you'll also be instrumental in taking down a monster and his entire criminal network. That has to be worth something. Ashley turned to her sister. Madison, I am so sorry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I had to tell you. I couldn't just let him kill you. Madison didn't respond. She couldn't. Part of her wanted to scream, to blame Ashley for every sleepless night, every ounce of fear she'd lived with. But another part saw the simple, devastating truth. Ashley was just one more life caught in Ryan's destructive orbit. Agent Miller slid a document across the table. This is a standard cooperation agreement. Review it. Sign it. Then, we need to go to your apartment and collect that evidence. With a trembling hand, Ashley picked up the pen and signed her name. The safe house was thick with the smell of stale coffee and raw fear as Madison watched her sister, the air between them heavy with everything left unsaid. Agents Miller and Davis stood near the door, ready to move. It was 11:30 in the morning on October 17th, and they were on their way to Ashley's apartment to secure the evidence that could put Ryan away for a very long time. Ashley looked completely drained, the dark circles under her eyes telling a story of profound exhaustion. Madison, for her part, had spent the last 12 hours trying to process the flood of revelations. Ryan's plot to murder her, his confession, the discovery of a massive counterfeiting operation in her own home. And now this, her sister, ensnared in Ryan's web of blackmail. Ready to go? Miller asked Ashley, her tone softer than before. She gave a small nod. Yeah, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. Let's just get it over with. They left in 2 separate cars. Miller drove the unmarked sedan with Madison and Ashley, while Davis followed close behind. The drive to Ashley's apartment was a silent 20-minute journey. From what I was told, she lived in a small, sad 2-bedroom unit on the edge of downtown Napa, in a building that had seen better days. The paint was peeling in sheets from the exterior walls, and the parking lot was a maze of cracks. Ashley unlocked her front door and led them inside. The apartment was clean but felt temporary, almost hollow. It was furnished with cheap pieces, a few generic pictures on the walls, and a laptop on the kitchen counter. It felt less like a home and more like a waiting room. "The files are in my bedroom," Ashley said, her voice devoid of emotion as she led them down a short hallway. Her bedroom was small and sparse, with just a bed pressed against one wall and a metal filing cabinet. She knelt, pulled open a drawer, and her fingers trembled as she sorted through the folders inside. "Here," she said, pulling out a thick manila folder and handing it to Miller. "This is all of it." Miller opened it, carefully removing documents and spreading them across the bed. Agent Davis immediately began photographing each page with his phone as a backup while setting up a portable scanner. The first document was the loan contract itself, dated March 15th, 2021. Ashley's signature was right there at the bottom, next to Ryan's. $150,000 at 8% annual interest. With the full amount due on March 15th, 2024, Madison read the terms again and again, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Ryan had fronted her the money, dirty money as she now knew, fully aware of the power it would give him. "Why did you need so much?" Madison asked, the words escaping before she could stop them. Ashley refused to meet her eyes. "I wanted to start my own real estate firm. I honestly thought I could succeed. I had a solid business plan, even had some clients lined up. But then the market took a dive in 2022, and everything just collapsed." Miller produced the next document, a handwritten payment ledger. Over a 2-year period, Ashley had made 5 payments, totaling $30,000. The balance remaining was a crushing $120,000. "That's still a huge amount to owe," Davis noted as he scanned the paper. "I know," Ashley whispered. "I tried. I was holding down 2 jobs, but he just kept tacking on new fees and raising the interest rate. It was never going to be enough." The next set of documents made Madison's blood turn to ice. It was a stack of 37 printed emails from Ryan's personal account, a chain of threats spanning from January of 2022 to September of 2024. Miller handed her the first one. She made herself read it. "Ashley, you're 3 months late. Settle up by March or I'm reporting your tax fraud. You falsified your 2021 return. That's a federal crime, a minimum of 5 years in prison. Don't make the mistake of testing me." Her hands began to shake violently. She flipped through the rest of the emails. They all followed the same cold, cruel pattern: threats, ultimatums, and stark reminders of how completely Ryan could and would destroy her life if she ever stopped obeying him. "Well, he held this over you for 2 years," Madison said, her voice barely audible. Ashley finally looked up, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know what else to do, Madison. I couldn't go to the police. I kept telling myself that if I just kept paying, he would eventually go away. But he never did." Davis finished his work and closed his laptop. "This is ironclad," he told Miller. "It's financial coercion, extortion, clear-cut blackmail." He preyed on her desperation. Miller nodded, her face a grim mask. "Ashley, you are a victim in this, but you were also an accomplice. By staying silent, you helped him continue his operations. You failed to report things that could have put a stop to him sooner. But your cooperation now will be taken into serious consideration by the court. You signed the agreement. That will count for a lot." Ashley wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know I should have come forward sooner. I was afraid. I'm still afraid." Miller then pulled an official document from her briefcase, the formal cooperation agreement between Ashley Gray and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She placed it on the bed. This document states that you agree to testify against Ryan and provide any further information required. In exchange, the prosecution will recommend a reduced sentence. Do you understand these terms? Yes, Ashley said quietly. Sign here. She accepted the pen from Miller, and as she signed her name on the line, her hand was perfectly steady. I've covered a lot of stories in my career, but some just burrow under your skin. This is one of them. It's the story of a man named Jake who watched the life he built with his wife, Brittany, get dismantled piece by piece. My source, Jake himself, told me it all started to unravel in a small apartment. He was standing in the doorway, watching Brittany finally break in front of her sister, Madison. Madison was on her knees, begging Brittany to see what he'd been trying to tell her for months. That's when Brittany whispered, "I'm sorry." Madison looked up, stunned. "I'm the one who—" Brittany started, but her sister stopped her. "I know," Madison said, her voice thick with regret. "But I should have noticed. I should have been there for you." For a long moment, the room was completely still. Then Brittany, her face a mess of tears, just shook her head slowly. "You never would have known," she told Madison. "Connor made sure of it." Connor, the man at the center of this whole nightmare. As Brittany was confessing, Jake was with an FBI agent, packing boxes of documents from her home. Evidence. He told me that when they were leaving, he looked back and saw his wife, and she just seemed fragile, as if the sheer weight of Connor's deception had finally crushed her spirit. He desperately wanted to promise her everything would be okay, but the words wouldn't come. How do you rebuild trust after a betrayal that deep? They got back to the FBI's field office a little after 2 p.m.? Jake's mind was a blur of what they'd found. Loan applications, menacing emails, a paper trail that laid out Connor's cruel, calculated psychological war against Brittany. Agent Evans ushered Jake into a small, sterile conference room with a large monitor on one wall. Another agent, Logan, was setting up a laptop. "We have someone joining us via video," Evans explained, motioning for him to sit. "His name is Mark Keller. He was your father-in-law's attorney." Jake told me hearing that name was like a ghost walking into the room. He remembered Mark Keller from the funeral when Brittany's father passed away back in 2020. A tall man in his 60s, silver hair, a gentle smile. He was the one who guided Brittany through the complexities of probate, who explained the contents of the will, or what they were led to believe was the will. Logan typed a few commands, and the screen flickered to life. Mark Keller appeared, seated in what looked like a lavish New York City law firm, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. He was all business in a navy suit and wire-rimmed glasses, his expression grave. "Mr. Hayes," he said, giving Jake a curt nod through the webcam. "I'm relieved to see you're unharmed." Agent Evans had already briefed him. "Mr. Keller?" Jake started, his voice strained. "I don't understand any of this." The lawyer leaned forward, steepling his fingers on the desk. "I need to show you something," he said. "Something that your wife should have received 4 years ago. It concerns her father's will." Evans quietly slid a bottle of water across the table to Jake. Jake took a long drink, trying to steady his shaking hands. Keller continued. "In September of 2019, your father-in-law, Michael Clark, visited my New York office. He came to me to draft his final will and testament." The attorney stressed that Michael had been meticulous, his instructions incredibly specific. The document was officially notarized by Helen Peterson on September 1st, 2019. "I'm holding the original copy right now," Keller said, lifting a thick sheaf of papers to the camera before placing it back down to read from it. "The will stipulates that 60% of Ashford Vineyard, with a value of approximately $5.1 million, is to be inherited by his daughter, Brittany Clark. 40%, valued at roughly $3.4 million, is to be donated to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital." Jake told me he just stared blankly at the screen as his mind struggled to process the words. St. Jude? He had to stop the lawyer, his throat suddenly tight. That wasn't what the will said. That's not the story Brittany had been living with for 4 years. Keller's professional demeanor softened into something like pity. "I know," he said gently. "The will that your wife was presented with in 2020 was a forgery." The entire room seemed to lurch. Jake said he gripped the conference table, his knuckles turning white. Keller went on to explain that Brittany's father had wanted to honor his late wife, Sarah, who had died from cancer in 2015. St. Jude was the hospital where she had received care. It was his way of keeping her memory alive. Jake admitted to me that his eyes were burning with tears at this part of the story. Sarah, he said, had been more of a mother to Brittany than her own had been. Her father wanted to create a legacy of kindness in her name, and Brittany never even knew. "So, what went wrong?" Agent Evans asked, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. Keller brought another document into the camera's view. "This is the will that was filed with the probate court," he explained. "It's a near-perfect duplicate of the original, with one very significant alteration." He had Logan display both documents side by side on the monitor. The dates were the same, the signatures appeared identical, but the line item for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital was simply gone. In its place, 100% of the vineyard was directed to Brittany. "Who did this?" Jake asked, hearing the tremor in his own voice. "Jessica Hayes," Keller replied, and the name hit Jake like a physical blow. She was the other attorney on file, the one who had handled the probate process after Michael's death. Keller had been out of the country dealing with a family emergency. Jessica was listed as the secondary executor. He had trusted her completely. "A mistake I deeply regret," he added. Evans leaned back in his chair, his arms folded. "Explain why removing the charity was the critical move." Keller nodded grimly. "When a major charity like St. Jude is named a beneficiary," he said, "they are legally obligated to perform a comprehensive audit of the estate. I'm talking full property appraisals, deep financial reviews, everything. If St. Jude had been allowed to audit Ashford Vineyard back in 2020, Keller elaborated, their investigators would have uncovered the counterfeit wine operation running out of the cellar in less than 2 weeks. It's a certainty." Jake said his stomach just dropped. The lawyer, Jessica, she had committed fraud on a massive scale just to shield Connor. "Precisely," Keller affirmed. By rewriting the will and cutting out the hospital, Jessica ensured that Brittany would inherit the entire property without any third-party scrutiny. No audit, no inspectors. And Connor's multi-million-dollar counterfeit ring could continue to operate completely undetected. That company is run by a man named Nikolai Petrov. If Brittany had gone through with the sale, she would have received $8.5 million. Connor would have pocketed a $2 million commission, and the criminal enterprise would have a new, complicit owner. It was a win for everyone involved, except, of course, for Brittany, who would have unknowingly transferred ownership of a massive criminal operation. But she said no, Jake murmured. She wouldn't sell. Keller looked at him intently through the screen. And that is when Connor initiated Plan B, he said. He would kill her, stage it to look like an accident, inherit the entire estate as her husband, and then sell the vineyard to Petrov himself. It's a much cleaner transaction. No arguments and no loose ends. So, this fraudulent will, it was never just about concealing the counterfeit wine. It was a strategic, cold-blooded maneuver. It was designed to give Brittany complete legal control, making it easier for Connor to either manipulate her into selling the property or simply eliminate her and claim it all for himself. That's correct, Keller confirmed. Jake just felt a wave of nausea. Every belief he and Brittany held about her inheritance, about her father's last wishes, was a carefully constructed lie. This woman, Jessica Hayes, had effectively stolen millions from a children's cancer hospital. She had desecrated the memory of a woman who died from that very disease, all to protect a monster like Connor. "What happens now?" Jake asked, his voice barely audible. "And that is how we officially expose the counterfeit ring and prove that Jessica forged the legal documents. The case is airtight." Keller gave a firm nod. "I will forward you a PDF of the authentic will," he said. "I have already conferred with St. Jude's legal department. They are prepared to proceed." "Thank you," Jake said, though the words felt hollow. Keller's expression softened slightly. "Your father-in-law adored his daughter's son. His only wish was to see her secure. I am profoundly sorry I wasn't there to ensure his wishes were carried out." And just like that, the screen went black. Jake told me he just sat there, staring into the blank monitor until Agent Evans placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "We are going to set this right," the agent promised. Jake could only manage a slight nod, unable to form words. His thoughts were consumed by the image of Brittany's dad, sitting in that law office 4 years prior, trying to honor his beloved wife, and how Connor, the man who was supposed to love his daughter, had systematically torn that legacy to shreds. Logan shut his laptop. "Jake," he said, "I just received an update from forensics. They are set to exhume Daniel Miller's body tomorrow morning." Agent Evans nodded. "Good. Let's get going." Jake forced himself to stand, his legs feeling unsteady. This whole nightmarish affair was unraveling, one horrifying thread at a time, and he had no idea if they could ever piece their lives back together again. Agent Evans and Jake showed up at the ME's office around 4 in the afternoon. They were met in the hallway by Dr. Emma Larson, a tall woman with streaks of silver in her dark hair and the weary eyes of someone who has seen the worst of humanity. "Agent Evans," she greeted, shaking his hand firmly. "The exhumation was successful. This way." She led them through a labyrinth of corridors into an examination room. There, lying on a cold steel table under the unforgiving glare of fluorescent lights, were the skeletal remains of Daniel Miller. Jake had never known the man, but he knew he'd left behind a wife and a daughter, and Connor had stolen him from them. Dr. Larson snapped on a pair of latex gloves and gestured toward the skull. "Daniel Miller died on September 23, 2022, she stated. "The original detective on the case ruled it a workplace accident, a fall from a ladder. He was mistaken." The official story of Jacob's death started to come apart on a cold slab in the city morgue. My source tells me the medical examiner, a Dr. Evans, brought up the scans for FBI agent Davis. She pointed to 2 distinct spiderweb-like fractures at the base of the skull. These weren't from some clumsy fall from a ladder, she insisted. This was the work of something heavy, something blunt. She figured a crowbar. She demonstrated how the blows came from above, from behind. A fall would have damaged the front or side of his head, leaving a completely different pattern. These were deliberate, separate impacts. And the most chilling detail, no defensive wounds, not a single scrape on his hands or arms. Jacob never saw it coming. Dr. Evans looked Davis straight in the eye and said, "This was murder." Then she slid a thick evidence file across the steel table. Agent Davis took the file and walked out into the cold evening air, his phone already buzzing. A colleague at the office had someone waiting for them. This, my source said, is the moment Madison's world truly tilted on its axis. The man waiting for them was Mark Miller, the same Mark Miller who had pressed a small wooden box into her hands 5 nights earlier before melting back into the shadows. This was Ryan's father, her husband's father, the one witness who had been buried for 2 agonizing years. 20 minutes later, they were all in a sterile conference room at the FBI building. Mark looked like a ghost. He was hunched over, a decade older than Madison remembered, his face a roadmap of grief. The moment he saw Madison, he shot to his feet, his chair clattering to the ground, and simply collapsed to his knees before her. The words were a choked sob. "I'm so sorry." He was looking up at her, a man completely shattered. "I should have gone to the police 2 years ago. Jacob's daughter. She needs to know the truth. I failed her. I failed both of you." Madison was frozen, just staring at the man unraveling on the floor. Agent Davis gently helped Mark back to his seat. "Mark, we need you to tell us everything now." Trembling, Mark nodded and pulled a small USB drive from his pocket, sliding it across the table. "This wasn't on the other recording," he whispered. "I kept this one back. I didn't know if I'd ever have the courage to show anyone." Without a word, Davis plugged the drive into his laptop. A single video file appeared on the screen. He clicked play. The footage was grainy, shot from a low angle, as if hidden among wine barrels in a cellar. The timestamp in the corner read, September 25th, 2022, at 11:52 p.m., just 2 days after Jacob had been killed. Madison's husband, Ryan, stumbled into the frame, clearly intoxicated. His brother Tyler leaned against a crate, a smirk playing on his lips. You could hear Ryan's slurred voice boasting. Jacob was pathetic. He cried, "Please, my wife, my daughter." Ryan let out a hollow, cruel laugh. "Victor told me, it's him or you. I chose to live." Tyler's smirk widened. "What happens if Madison finds out?" Ryan's smile turned predatory. "I'll do the same damn thing to her. She's worth $3 million to me in life insurance. Easy." The video cut to black, leaving Madison in a silent room, struggling to breathe. A part of her must have known. Deep down, Madison knew Ryan was planning to kill her. Mark's cryptic warning, the other small puzzle pieces, it all pointed to this. But to hear the words from his own mouth, to hear that casual, cold-blooded cruelty, that made it devastatingly real. Agent Davis snapped the laptop shut and faced Mark. "Why didn't Victor kill you? You were a witness, a loose end." Mark just shook his head. It turns out, Ryan had never even told his business partner his own father was there. He was ashamed that his deadbeat dad was working as a handyman on his wealthy wife's vineyard. He'd told Victor that Mark was just some temp, a nobody with no ties. "I used an old Nokia to record it," Mark explained. "No GPS, no internet. And I only went to that cellar at exactly 11:47 p.m. I'm told a look of realization dawned on Agent Davis's face. The camera's blind spot. Exactly, Mark confirmed. For 3 minutes, every night, the system went down for maintenance. It was a glitch. I timed it. Victor had no idea he even existed until that moment. Davis leaned back, a grim smile forming. We hacked their surveillance logs last night. That 11:47 p.m. blind spot is a software bug from 2020. They were just too cheap or lazy to ever get it fixed. Ryan's father nodded. That's how I stayed hidden. But his hands wouldn't stop shaking. I was a coward, he whispered. I should have gone to the police right after he killed Jacob. I was scared of Victor, scared of my own son. I thought they'd hunt me down. So I just kept recording, praying someone would figure it out. Then I saw him, Mark said, his eyes finding Madison's. I saw Ryan pressuring you to sell the vineyard. I knew. I knew he was coming for you next. That was the moment his fear for her finally eclipsed the fear for himself. Madison just looked at this broken man, a man drowning in 2 years of guilt who had risked everything to warn her. She wanted to scream at him for his silence, for letting Jacob's killer walk free. But all she felt was a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. You saved my life, was all she could manage to say. Mark's eyes filled with tears again. But Jacob's little girl will grow up without a father. That's on me. Agent Davis stood. Mark, you're going to testify. Everything you have is now evidence, you understand? Mark just whispered, I know. I'm ready. Agent Davis turned to his partner. Get this video to the DA immediately and find out who Jessica Hayes is sleeping with. Ryan has to have someone else on his payroll. His partner grinned. Way ahead of you. This should be interesting. Madison rose to her feet, her legs unsteady. Mark looked up at her, his face a canvas of regret, mixed with a sliver of hope. She wasn't sure she could ever truly forgive him, but he had given her the truth, which was more than her husband ever had. Later, the inside of a surveillance van smelled of stale coffee and takeout. Madison was wedged between Davis and his partner, her eyes glued to a bank of monitors, each screen a portal into a life she no longer recognized. Through the tinted window, she saw the entrance to a luxury resort tucked away in the Napa Hills. It was 6 o'clock in the evening, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and fire. Targets are on the move, Davis said, tapping a screen. A black Mercedes sedan glided to a stop. Ryan got out, straightening the jacket of his expensive suit. He looked completely relaxed, a man in absolute control of his world. Madison's breath caught in her throat. That was her husband, the man she had loved, the man who was going to kill her. Second vehicle approaching, an agent in the front seat announced. A silver Lexus pulled up. A woman emerged, tall, in her mid-40s, with blonde hair pulled into a severe bun. She wore a tailored suit and high heels. Jessica Hayes, Davis said, his gaze locked on the monitor. There she is. What is she to him? Madison asked, though a sick certainty was already twisting in her stomach. More than just his lawyer, Davis replied, his voice low. Just watch. On the screen, Ryan walked directly to Jessica. There was no handshake. Instead, he placed his hand on the small of her back, leaning in to murmur something as they walked toward the hotel entrance. The touch was casual, intimate, the kind of gesture reserved for a lover. Madison felt a wave of nausea. Room 307, Davis said, glancing at a tablet. She booked it under the name Laura Mitchell, paid cash. They've been meeting here every 2 weeks for the past 6 months. Davis keyed his radio. Alpha team, you are a go. Plant the device and get out. We need that audio, he commanded. Copy that. A voice crackled in response. On a different screen, Madison saw two agents dressed as hotel maintenance staff slip into room 307. They were efficient, one working the lock while the other placed a tiny listening device beneath a nightstand. They were gone in less than 30 seconds. Davis tuned the audio feed, and the van was suddenly filled with the sounds of the hotel room. A door opening, footsteps, muffled voices, and then Ryan's voice, perfectly clear. We have to be careful. Davis has been asking questions. He has my father's recordings. The FBI knows about Jacob. Jessica's voice was calm, cold. Your father is irrelevant. He's a drunk, she said, with no credibility. And Jacob's case was officially closed 2 years ago. My husband made sure of that. Your husband, Ryan said with a bitter little laugh. So useful. He did what he was paid to do, Jessica shot back. He ruled Jacob's death a workplace accident. No autopsy, no further questions. He's been a valuable asset. Madison felt sick. Detective Peterson, Jessica's husband, had covered up Jacob's murder. He had accepted a bribe to bury a homicide so that his own wife could continue her affair with the man who did it. There was a pause on the audio feed, followed by the unmistakable sound of a wine cork popping. Madison could picture them perfectly, planning her death over a glass of expensive wine. My source slid a digital audio file across the table, and the story that unfolded was colder than the condensation on my water glass. After tomorrow night, a woman's voice, smooth and confident, says, Chloe will be gone. A car accident on Highway 29, just like we planned. You'll get 100% of the vineyard. We sell to Tyler for $8.5 million. I leave David. And we can finally be together. A man, Ryan, gives a low chuckle. Tyler gets his cut first, 30%. After that, we're ghosts. Costa Rica, just like we dreamed. New identities, a new life. But what about Ethan and Jessica? The woman, Madison, asks. The silence that follows is thick with unspoken violence. Then Ryan's voice returns, dropping to a terrifying whisper. They're just loose ends. If they start asking questions, I'll pin Liam's murder on them. I've already got their prints on the crowbar. Tyler's crew took care of it. And I'm told Chloe was gripping the steel bench inside that surveillance van so tightly, her knuckles were ghost white. Ethan and Jessica, her own sister and the brother of the man she loved. He was going to sacrifice them without a second thought, just to save himself. It became sickeningly clear he had orchestrated everything, ensnaring Jessica in a mountain of debt, seducing Ethan with the promise of a big payout. All so he could set them up to take the fall. My FBI source just shook his head, recounting the moment. The man is a stone-cold psychopath. He's plotting to frame his own family. Through the static of the audio feed, a rustle of clothing, the distinct sound of a zipper. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, trying to banish the image of what was happening in that hotel room. Then she heard Madison's voice, a soft, intimate murmur. I love you. I love you too, Ryan answered. After tomorrow, it's only us. Every so often, a story lands on your desk that chills you to the bone. This is one of them. A source inside the bureau walked me through it. Picture this. You're sitting in a dark, cramped surveillance van surrounded by the faint glow of monitors, and the only thing you can hear is the voice of your husband, the man you built a life with, meticulously planning your death. That was the nightmare Chloe found herself in. When the recording ended, the agent in charge, a man named Miller, turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Are you all right?" he asked. An impossible question. She knew her husband, Ryan, wanted her dead. But to hear him discuss it, to hear him map out a future with his lawyer, Madison, as if Chloe's murder was just another item on his to-do list, that's a wound that never heals. And Madison wasn't just his lawyer. Agent Miller laid out the whole ugly truth. She was a co-conspirator. She'd forged Chloe's father's will. She helped Ryan scheme the entire thing, and her own husband had been unknowingly helping cover their tracks. This was never just about one man's greed. It was a conspiracy. And on a tablet, a new face appeared. Detective David Hayes, a 32-year veteran of the force. Here was a decorated officer with a career that looked spotless, right up until it wasn't. Chloe's voice was barely a whisper when she asked, "How much did Ryan pay him?" Agent Miller kept scrolling through digital files. They had uncovered an offshore account, $87,000, transferred to Hayes just 2 days after a man named Liam was found dead. That was the price of a cop's silence. Ryan, my source tells me, stood up so fast his head nearly hit the van's ceiling. Miller told his team they had to bring Detective Hayes in. If Madison was using her own husband to manipulate an investigation, they needed to understand just how far the corruption went. Chloe asked if Hayes knew about the affair. Miller just shook his head. "Unlikely," he said. Madison was playing a dangerous game, using her husband to bury the crimes of her lover. When this story breaks, David's career, his entire life, is going to be incinerated. His marriage, his reputation, everything he had built, turned to ash. Miller shut the file on his laptop. "All right, team," he said, his voice all business. "We open an investigation into Hayes, find out what he knows, how much he was paid, and if he's still on Madison's leash." Ryan, inside the van, picked up his radio. He ordered his Alpha team to pull back. They had the evidence they needed. Bravo team was to remain in place, maintaining constant surveillance on Ryan and Madison. He wanted a record of every single move they made. A voice crackled in response. "Copy that." Chloe could only stare at the monitors, watching the hotel. In just a few hours, Ryan and Madison would walk out of that room, smiling, convinced they had committed the perfect crime. They were oblivious. The FBI had the tapes. They had it all. And by the next day, their carefully constructed world was poised to burn to the ground. "So, what's the next step?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling. Miller sat down across from her, his gaze steady. "Now," he said, "we spring the trap. Ryan thinks he's going to stage your murder tomorrow night on Highway 29. But we're going to be there waiting. The moment he makes his move, we'll have him." A grim smile touched Miller's lips. "It's going to be a show." Chloe just nodded, forcing herself to breathe, trying to process the impossible reality. Tomorrow night, the nightmare would end. But the first order of business was Detective David Hayes. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit was a sprawling maze of cubicles, buzzing with the quiet hum of servers and hushed, intense phone calls. It was 8 o'clock in the evening, and the floor was nearly deserted. But Agent Miller was hunched over a monitor, completely absorbed. Ryan and Chloe stood just behind him, watching him navigate a labyrinth of digital firewalls, pulling up encrypted bank records and hidden transaction logs. "There you are," Miller muttered, tapping his finger on the screen. "Detective David Hayes, let's see what secrets you've been keeping." A spreadsheet filled the monitor, a dizzying cascade of numbers. Miller highlighted a section in yellow. "Offshore account, Cayman Islands," he announced. Opened in March 2022, the same month Liam was killed. And there it was, plain as day. $87,000 wired from a shell corporation named Baltic Imports. Ryan leaned closer. Baltic Imports? He said, recognizing the name. That's one of Tyler's fronts. Miller simply nodded. That's right, he said. And we're not looking at just a single payment. Ah. He pointed to 18 separate transactions stretching between 2022 and 2024. Small deposits, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, all meticulously structured to avoid triggering any alarms. It added up to 87 grand. My source said Chloe looked at that screen, a knot tightening in her stomach. For 2 whole years, Detective Hayes had been accepting blood money from a known crime boss. Each deposit was a bribe to stay quiet, to ensure he looked the other way. There's more, Miller said, clicking open another file. A second offshore account, this one based in Panama. It was opened in June 2023. The balance was $120,000. The source was listed as unknown. Ryan crossed his arms. Unknown or just well hidden? He asked. Well hidden, Miller confirmed. The money was laundered through 3 different banks in 3 different countries. The person who set this up was a professional, but Miller had managed to trace the funds back to another one of Tyler's shell companies. Ryan could only shake his head in disbelief. Hayes wasn't just a compromised cop. He was on Tyler's payroll. But why? Chloe asked, her voice filled with confusion. He was a decorated officer for 32 years. Why throw it all away for a man like Tyler? Miller pulled up yet another file. This, he said, is where things get complicated. Let me show you something. A police report materialized on the screen. It was an arrest record for a 19-year-old woman named Ashley Hayes. She was arrested on August 14, 2021, for possession of 150 grams of cocaine with intent to distribute. The mugshot showed a terrified young woman who was the spitting image of her father. She had his exact same strong jawline, the same intensely serious eyes. That's Hayes' daughter, Ryan said, his voice barely a whisper. Miller scrolled further down the report. She was looking at a major federal felony charge, he explained, a mandatory minimum of 5 to 10 years in prison. But then something strange occurred. He displayed a case dismissal form, dated September 22, 2021. The cocaine, which was the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, had simply vanished from the police evidence locker. It was gone. No official report, no internal investigation. Without the evidence, the district attorney's office had no case. The charges were dropped. Ashley Hayes walked out a free woman, her record completely clean. A cold realization washed over the room. Tyler made the evidence disappear. Precisely, Miller said. He saved David's daughter, Ryan pieced together, and in exchange, Hayes was in his debt, permanently. Miller leaned back in his chair, closing the file. So, when Liam was murdered in September 2022, Hayes was the first officer to arrive on the scene. He officially ruled the death a workplace accident in under 48 hours. He ordered no autopsy, no forensics, nothing. He closed the case before anyone even had a chance to ask a single question. Ryan's jaw was clenched. Hayes is Tyler's man on the inside, he stated. He's been the guardian angel for his entire criminal operation for 2 years. Chloe finally found her voice again. And his wife, Madison, does she have any idea? Miller pulled up their marriage license, followed by their joint financial statements. It's difficult to know for certain, Miller conceded. They maintained largely separate finances. But we found this. Hayes transferred $20,000 to Madison's personal account in January of 2023. There was no reason listed. Ryan frowned. Was it a payoff from her husband? Or just a routine transfer between spouses? It could be interpreted either way, Miller said. But let's review what we know for sure. Madison forged Mr. Peterson's will back in 2020. She has been Ryan's attorney and his lover for at least the last 6 months. And her husband, Detective David Hayes, covered up a murder for him. They were all connected. My source said. Chloe sank into a nearby chair, the world spinning around her. Ryan, Madison, David Tyler. It was a sprawling, tangled web of corruption, betrayal, and murder. And somehow, her family's vineyard was at the very center of it all. Her father's legacy, the place he had poured his soul into, was now a pawn in a game played by criminals to ruin innocent lives. What about Ashley? Chloe asked. Hayes's daughter. Is she involved in any of this? Miller shook his head. There's no evidence to suggest that, he said. She's currently a student at UC Davis, majoring in biology. As far as our intelligence can tell, she is completely unaware of what her father has been doing to keep her safe. Ryan moved to the window, looking out over the city lights. Hayes sold his soul to the devil to save his daughter, he said, his voice heavy with a strange mix of condemnation and understanding. You can almost see the logic, but it doesn't excuse any of it. He covered up a murder. He's been protecting a monster for 2 years. It all started, my source explained, with a simple question from Madison. So what's next? Agent Miller turned from the whiteboard, his expression grim. We bring him down, he stated, the words hanging in the air. Tomorrow night, Highway 29, mile marker 52. Ryan's planning to stage your death as a car accident, but we're going to be waiting. Miller stood, stretching his arms over his head. It's a full-on sting. We let Ryan believe his sick fantasy is playing out perfectly. He drives you out there convinced he's about to be a very wealthy widower. The second he makes a move, we descend on him. It'll be a clean arrest, with evidence so solid he'll never see daylight again. Then, his eyes locked on Madison's. You're the bait, Madison. Can you handle this? I was told she thought of Kevin, the man Ryan left to die in their wine cellar. She pictured Tyler, the terrified employee who spent 2 years secretly recording evidence, risking everything. She remembered Jessica, another woman Ryan had twisted and threatened, and she thought of her dad and how Ryan was poisoning his legacy. Yes, she said, her voice unwavering. I'll do it. Miller gave a single sharp nod. Good, he said. Phase 12. We map out the trap. We account for every single detail, every possible contingency. We only get one shot at this. We cannot fail. A grim smile touched Miller's lips. This, he declared, is going to be one for the books. Madison pushed herself to her feet, her legs trembling. Tomorrow, on that dark highway, her life with Ryan would finally end. He was going to try and kill her, and the feds would be there to watch. She just had to survive long enough to see them put the bracelets on him. The tactical briefing room felt like a freezer, cold and sterile under the hum of fluorescent lights. A long metal table dominated the space, surrounded by 12 federal agents in dark suits, every one of them armed and ready. Agent Miller stood at the head of the table, his demeanor strictly professional. A laptop next to him projected a detailed map of the Hayes vineyard onto a large screen. Madison, my source said, sat toward the back, right next to Tyler. He looked years older than she remembered, his face ashen and his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold his coffee cup. This was the man who watched Ryan murder Kevin, the man who risked his own life for 2 years to see justice done. And, at the head of that table, orchestrating the takedown of his own wife's husband, was Agent Miller. "All right, listen up," he commanded, his voice cutting through the tension. "We get one chance. If we screw this up, Ryan walks, Madison dies, and his whole dirty money operation keeps humming along. That's not happening tonight. Do you all understand me?" A chorus of "Yes, sir," echoed through the room. Miller pointed a laser at the screen. "Ashford Vineyard, 50 acres give or take. Main house here, wine cellar here, stables over here. At 8 p.m., Ryan Hayes is meeting his wife, Madison, in that cellar. He's under the impression she's finally broken, that she's going to sell him the vineyard. He thinks he's already won. What he doesn't know is that we're coming for him." Agent Miller clicked to the next slide, revealing a blueprint of the wine cellar. "Madison will be wearing a microtransmitter, disguised as a button on her jacket," he explained. "It provides audio and GPS. We'll hear every single word Ryan says, and we'll have her exact location second by second. She also has this." He held up a small device that looked like a black watch. "It's a panic button. She presses it once, and we breach in 10 seconds. No hesitation." An agent in the back raised her hand. "What if he frisks her? What if he discovers the wire?" Miller nodded, having anticipated the question. A valid concern. Madison is going to tell him she's nervous and wants to record their conversation for her own legal protection. It's a plausible story. He'll likely buy it. And what if he doesn't? Madison's own voice was tight with fear. "Then you hit that button," Miller said, his tone absolute. "We move in, and we move in hard. But let's all hope it doesn't come to that. We need Ryan to confess on that wire. We need him talking about Kevin Miller, about the counterfeiting ring, about his plan to have you murdered. The more he talks, the tighter the net we draw around him." Agent Miller brought up another slide, this one showing the positions of 12 FBI agents as red dots sprinkled across the property. "Alpha Team, 2 agents. You're in the stables, concealed by the hay. Bravo Team, 3 agents. You're behind wine barrels in the south corridor of the cellar. Charlie Team, 2 agents. You're on the roof of the main house, handling long-range surveillance. Delta Team, you're positioned in 3 unmarked vehicles at the vineyard entrance. And Echo Team, that's myself and Agent Davis. We'll be in the mobile command van parked a half-mile down the road." "What about me?" The question came from Madison's brother, Liam. His voice was barely a whisper. Miller turned to him. "You're in the tunnel. Secret access point 3, the one only you know about? You stay there until you get the all clear. If Ryan or Jessica heads for that tunnel, you use the emergency exit and get out. Do not, under any circumstances, engage him. Understood?" Liam just nodded. "Understood." Miller looked back at Madison. "Your job is to keep Ryan talking. Ask him about Kevin. Ask him why he did all this. You have to convince him you're terrified, defeated, and ready to do anything he says." The longer he talks," Miller continued, "the more evidence he gives us. But if you see a weapon, if he so much as looks like he's going to hurt you, you hit that button. Don't hesitate. Don't you dare try to be a hero. We've got you." I was told you could almost feel Madison's hands shaking under the table. She was desperately trying to hide it. What if he brings Jessica or one of his other people? Agent Miller leaned forward. "We're tracking all of them. Jessica is at her office downtown. Liam is at his apartment. Petrov is still down at the Oakland docks. We've had a team on him 24/7. If any of them even start heading toward the vineyard, we'll get an immediate alert. Miller glanced at his watch. It's 10 o'clock. Madison, you need to call Ryan right now. Convince him you're ready to sell. You have to make him believe it. She pulled out her phone, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. Miller slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a script, essentially, with key points she needed to hit. You don't have to read it word for word, Miller told her gently. Just get the core ideas across. You're exhausted. You can't handle the pressure anymore. You're giving in. Ryan has to believe that he has finally and completely broken you. She nodded, her mouth desert dry, and dialed his number. It rang only twice. Madison? His voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with fake concern. It was the same voice he used when he once claimed to love her. Hey, babe. Everything okay? She forced a crack into her voice, making it sound hollow. Ryan, you were right. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep running this place alone, she went on. It's just too much. You could hear the deafening silence on the other end of the line, and you just knew he was smiling, savoring his victory. What are you saying, Madison? She took a shaky breath. I'm saying, you win. Let's sell it. Bring the contract to the wine cellar tonight at 8. I'll sign. Another pause, this one stretching even longer. Are you serious? You're certain about this? She squeezed her eyes shut, drawing on every ounce of real fear and exhaustion she'd felt for weeks. I'm sure, I want this to be over. I want it all to stop. Okay, Ryan said, his voice softening into a manipulative purr. Okay, honey, that's good. That's really good. I'll bring Jessica to witness the signing. We'll make it official. You're making the right choice. I know, she whispered. I'll see you tonight. 8 o'clock, wine cellar. I love you, Madison. She couldn't say it back. She just ended the call. The briefing room was completely silent. Every single agent was staring at her. Agent Miller gave a slow, measured nod. You did great, he said, his voice thick with a strange mix of pride and gravity. He bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. She put her phone down on the table, her hands still trembling. Liam came over and gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. You're brave, he said softly. A hell of a lot braver than I ever was. Agent Miller stood, closing his laptop with a decisive snap. All right, team, we have 10 hours to get into position. Check your equipment, run communications checks, and stay sharp. Tonight, we take down Ryan Hayes, Jessica Hayes, and their entire network. Let's make this count. The agents began to file out, their faces set like stone. But Miller stayed behind, walking over to Madison. You know, you can still back out of this, he offered, if this is too much. No, she cut him off, her voice firm. I'm doing this for Kevin, for Liam, for my father, for every single person Ryan has hurt. Miller studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, get some rest. It's gonna be a long night. She stood up, her legs feeling like they might give out. Liam walked with her toward the door. As they stepped into the hallway, he spoke so quietly she almost missed it. When this is all over, he said, I'm going to tell you everything about our dad. The man he was before all this, before the vineyard, before the money, the guy who loved you more than anything. Tears welled in her eyes, but she just nodded. I'd like that. They walked out into the afternoon sun. Across town, Ryan was probably celebrating, thinking he'd finally won. He thought tonight was his coronation. He had no idea it was his end. When I first heard the story of Ryan Clark, it wasn't the explosion that stuck with me. It was the silence before it. I've pieced this together from sources close to the investigation, and it all starts with his son's wife, Madison. Picture her descending into the family's wine cellar, the air thick and cold. It was precisely 8 o'clock. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, her breath catching in her throat. A tiny transmitter was expertly hidden in a coat button, and a panic watch was concealed beneath her cuff. What I'm about to tell you is the core of what truly happened that night. She hit the lights, and the cellar flickered to life, illuminating rows of oak barrels and walls of priceless dust-covered bottles. She positioned herself near a long tasting table, her hands trembling so fiercely she had to clasp them together just to appear steady. Just outside, a dozen FBI agents were positioned, holding their breath, listening. One of them, an undercover agent named Davis, was secreted away in a hidden passage. A half-mile down the road, Ryan and the lead agent, Miller, were wired in, hearing every rustle of clothing, every shaky breath Madison took. At 5 minutes past 8, footsteps echoed on the stone stairs. 3 sets. First came Tyler, Ryan's son, dressed in a sharp suit, a picture of calm confidence. Behind him, his friend Dylan looked like he was about to vomit, his eyes scanning every shadow. And then there was Jessica Clark, Tyler's associate, clutching a leather briefcase, her expression as unyielding as the cellar walls. "Madison," Tyler said, his smile wide and disarming. "So glad you decided to be reasonable." She remained silent, her gaze fixed on them as they approached the table. Jessica placed the briefcase on the wood, snapped open the latches, and produced a thick sheaf of documents. "Purchase and sale agreement," she announced, her tone clipped and professional. "Sign on pages 1, 5, and 9. $8.5 million will be in your account within 48 hours. She slid the papers and a pen toward Madison, who picked it up with a visibly shaking hand. She stared down at the contract, pretending to scan the legal text before setting the pen back down. "Before I sign," she began, her voice a low but firm thread in the silence, "I have to ask you something, Tyler." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "What is it?" She lifted her head, her eyes locking onto his. "Why did you kill Kevin Peterson?" The air in the room turned to ice. A profound silence fell. Tyler's face was a blank mask, betraying nothing. Dylan, however, turned ghost white. Jessica's jaw tightened. "Madison!" Jessica hissed. "Stop being absurd. Just sign the contract." But Madison's focus was unwavering. "I know about all of it. The counterfeiting ring, the 47 million in forged currency. I know about Nikolai Petrov. And I know you plan to have me killed tonight on Highway 29, right at mile marker 52. Tyler's smile vanished completely. He rose slowly, his hand disappearing inside his suit jacket. It reemerged holding a Glock 19. "You always were too smart for your own good," he said, his voice stripped of all warmth. Madison took a half step back, her own hand moving toward her wrist, her fingers brushing the hidden button. She was about to press it when a section of the stone wall behind her began to grind open, revealing a hidden doorway. Everyone whirled around. Agent Davis stepped out from the darkness of the secret passage, a double-barreled shotgun leveled directly at Tyler's chest. "Put the gun on the table, son." Ryan's voice boomed from the doorway behind Davis, raw with anguish. Tyler's face contorted in disbelief. "Dad, I told you to end this," Ryan pleaded. "I begged you. You wouldn't listen. I won't let you hurt anyone else." But Tyler didn't move. The Glock still aimed, his mind racing, desperately searching for an escape. Tyler! Ryan's voice cracked as he stumbled back towards the stairs. What in God's name is going on? Stay out of this, Tyler snarled. Madison reached for her phone, but Dylan instinctively swung the barrel of his own shotgun in her direction. I really wouldn't do that. The tension in the cellar was suffocating. I was told Ryan could hear his own heart pounding, a frantic beat against the deafening quiet. He saw his son's finger whiten on the trigger. And, in that instant, chaos erupted. The cellar was engulfed in a blinding flash and a concussive roar. FBI agents swarmed in from every conceivable entry point. The main stairs, hidden side doors, even dropping from lofts above. A complex web of red laser sights painted the room, dozens of them converging on Tyler, Dylan, and Jessica. A voice on a bullhorn commanded, FBI, drop your weapons, hands where I can see them. The order echoed off the stone walls. For one terrifying second, Tyler froze, his hand still gripping the pistol. Ryan told me he was certain his son was about to start shooting. But then Tyler's eyes darted around the room, taking in the impossible circle of agents closing in. The gun fell from his hand, its clatter on the concrete floor seeming to last an eternity. On your knees! Now! An agent shouted. Tyler's legs buckled and he collapsed, his expression a storm of shock and pure rage. Dylan fell beside him, already raising his hands, tears carving paths through the dust on his cheeks. But Madison just stood there, perfectly still, her face a mask of cold resolve. 3 agents descended on Tyler, wrenching his arms back to cuff him. 2 more secured Dylan. Agent Miller himself approached Madison. He cuffed her with a calm, practiced efficiency, his voice even as he read her Miranda rights. Madison Clark, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, obstruction of justice, and running a counterfeit currency operation. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. She offered no resistance, her gaze fixed only on Ryan. The look in her eyes, he said, was one of pure, unadulterated hatred. Dylan was a wreck, sobbing hysterically. I didn't want any part of this. He made me do it. He said Tyler would have me killed if I didn't help. Tell it to the DA, an agent muttered, pulling him to his feet. Madison said nothing as Miller led her away, up the stone steps and out of Ryan Clark's life forever. An agent Ryan didn't know approached him, his expression a mix of professional gravity and human relief. Are you okay, sir? Ryan could only manage a nod, unable to trust his voice. His legs felt like they might give out from under him. The undercover agent, Davis, finally lowered the shotgun and placed it on the table. He walked over to Ryan, his own eyes looking weary. It's all over, he said softly. You're safe now. And that's when the composure Ryan had been holding on to just shattered. He fell against Davis, his body racked with the kind of sobs that had been held back for far too long. Davis held him steady, a solid presence in the spinning chaos. It's over, he repeated. You're safe. From outside, Ryan could hear the sounds of car doors slamming and engines turning over. They were taking his son away. Agent Miller stood at the cellar entrance, his voice a low buzz as he spoke into his radio. He appeared at the top of the stairs, his gaze settling on Ryan. We need to move you, sir. We have one more situation to deal with. Ryan looked up, trying to clear his vision. What kind of situation? Dylan's flipping, Miller stated. All business. He wants to make a deal. He says there's something down here we have to see, something in the tunnel that will lock this whole thing up. Miller then turned to the undercover agent. Davis, let's see it. Davis gave a solemn nod and picked up a heavy flashlight from the table. This way. He led them to the hidden panel he'd emerged from earlier. He pushed it open, revealing a tight, stone-lined corridor that plunged into absolute darkness. "What's in there?" Miller asked. Davis's face was grim in the dim light. "The core of the whole operation. If their boss finds out we're down here, he can detonate the whole tunnel remotely. I figure we have about 30 minutes before he knows something went wrong." Miller exchanged a look with Davis, then stared into the blackness. "Then, we don't have time to waste. Secure the tunnel, get Dylan's official statement. Let's move." As they descended into the cold, damp passage, the walls seemed to close in around Ryan. He had this gut-wrenching feeling that buried deep beneath his family's home lay the final, ugly truths. Miles away, Tyler was being forced into an armored van, his face pressed to the wire mesh, his eyes still wild with rage as the heavy door slammed shut. Dylan was in another vehicle, weeping into his cuffed hands. Madison was in a third, her expression as silent and cold as stone. Ryan stood at the edge of his own driveway, watching as the wreckage of his life was categorized and hauled away. Davis stood beside him, a steadying hand on his shoulder, while Agent Miller barked orders into a radio. And then it happened. A deep, guttural boom. The entire wine cellar erupted. A massive fireball tore through the earth, a roaring pillar of flame that climbed 50 feet into the night sky. The shockwave hit Ryan like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. The ground trembled violently beneath him as windows in his house exploded outward. A rain of stone, splintered timber, and twisted steel fell across the vineyard he had spent his life building. "Get down!" I'm told the scream came from Tyler, who pulled Ryan to the dirt just as the world erupted. He shielded Ryan with his own body while fiery fragments rained down around them. Agents scrambled, ducking behind their SUVs and the rows of oak barrels. Agent Peterson took cover behind a mobile command unit, his arms over his head. The blast rolled through the valley, a physical force that seemed to vibrate in your bones, a roar that felt endless. When silence finally rushed back in, all that was left was the hiss of the fire and a piercing whine in Ryan's ears. Tyler helped him to a sitting position. He felt a warm trickle on his forehead, a small cut from a flying piece of metal. Tyler, his face pale as a sheet, pressed his sleeve to the wound. "You with me?" he asked. Ryan could only nod, the ground still feeling like it was swaying beneath him. His hands, he remembers, were shaking so badly he couldn't stop them. That ringing just wouldn't quit. I heard Agent Peterson was already back in his command van, his fingers a blur across the keyboard. "Talk to me. What was that?" Peterson's voice crackled over the radio, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of his laptop. "Got it. Signal trace is complete. The trigger came from Oakland. Satellite phone, remote activation." Peterson's jaw clenched. "It's Cole. He's torching the evidence." The wine cellar simply ceased to exist. In its place, where his father had built a beautiful tasting room, where Ryan had spent years pouring his family's legacy into glasses for strangers, was a massive smoldering crater. The press, the $47 million in counterfeit bills, the logbooks, it was all gone, turned to ash and smoke. And then, from inside an FBI van, a terrified scream. "I'll talk! I'll give you everything!" It was Kevin. I was told two agents flung the van door open, and Kevin practically tumbled out onto the gravel. His face was a wreck, streaked with tears and grime, his entire body shaking. He landed on his knees, his hands still cuffed. "Please," he sobbed, his voice shattering. "I don't want to die. I'll tell you what you want to know." Agent Peterson was in front of him in an instant. "Start talking." The story spilled out of Kevin in a desperate, chaotic flood. "Cole, it's tonight. Oakland Port, Dock 47, in a container marked 7 Alpha. It's $200 million. He's loading it onto a ship right now. It leaves at 10:30 p.m. If that ship hits international waters, he's gone. You'll never find him." Peterson checked his watch. 8:52 p.m. That left them with 1 hour and 38 minutes. He was on his feet, radio in hand. "All units, converge on Oakland Port, Dock 47. Lethal forces a go. Coast Guard, I want the bay locked down. Air support, get in the sky now." The response was immediate. Agents sprinted toward their vehicles, the night filling with the sound of roaring engines. 3 black SUVs peeled out of the vineyard, sirens blaring. In the distance, Ryan heard the heavy, rhythmic thumping of helicopter blades spinning to life. Peterson pointed at his tech agent. "I need 50 agents on that dock. Get me SWAT, tactical, the bomb squad. If Cole has more explosives, I want them found and disarmed before he takes out a city block." "You got it," the agent replied, already dialing. Ryan pushed himself to his feet, his legs feeling like jelly. Tyler was right there, steadying him. He could still feel the blood on his forehead, but the pain was a distant thing. He walked straight to Peterson. "I'm going with you," he stated. Peterson's face was unreadable, like carved stone. "Mr. Clark?" "Don't," Ryan cut in. "My name is Ryan, and I'm not asking for permission. That was my family's vineyard he just destroyed. My father's life's work. I'm gonna be there when you put him in cuffs." Peterson stared at him for what felt like a lifetime. Then his eyes flicked to Tyler. The undercover agent gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "He should be there," Tyler said. Peterson let out a long, weary breath and gestured to a waiting SUV. "Fine, get in. But you do not leave that vehicle when we make entry. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear," Ryan said. The tech agent grabbed a med kit from the van and quickly put a bandage on Ryan's forehead. Ryan and Tyler got into the back of Peterson's SUV, with the tech agent taking the passenger seat. Peterson got behind the wheel. "Hang on," he said, and then stomped on the accelerator. The vehicle lurched forward, spitting gravel as it tore down the long driveway. They hit the main road with sirens screaming and lights painting the night in strobes of red and blue. A convoy of federal vehicles fell in line behind them. More black SUVs, armored trucks, unmarked cars. Above, the silhouettes of 3 helicopters banked sharply, heading west toward the lights of Oakland. The radio in the SUV crackled. "Coast Guard Cutter Steadfast and Cutter Vigilant are moving to position. ETA is 15 minutes. They're setting up a blockade at the mouth of the bay." "Received," Peterson answered, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Under no circumstances does that cargo ship leave United States waters." Ryan just watched the dark landscape race by outside his window. The vineyard was gone, a pillar of black smoke against a starless sky. Everything his father had poured his soul into, everything Ryan had fought to save, had vanished. But Cole was still out there, and if they didn't get to him in the next 90 minutes, he would vanish too. Tyler reached over, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. "We're gonna get him, man," he said, his voice low. Ryan nodded, his jaw tight. "We have to." Peterson's voice cut the tension. "All right, listen up. This is it. We bring in Cole, we secure that currency, and we shut down this entire operation for good." The SUV flew down the highway, its headlights a beacon in the oppressive dark. They arrived at the port just after 9:30 p.m., part of a 15-car convoy that moved with an unnerving silence. This is the part of the story that Ryan says is seared into his memory. The Oakland docks at night felt like another world, a maze of steel canyons under the sickly orange glow of sodium lamps. You could smell the salt and the diesel fuel hanging heavy in the air. The giant cranes stood like skeletons against the sky, their lights like lonely stars in the dark. Agent Peterson was behind the wheel, his focus absolute. Next to him, Agent Grant monitored the positions of the helicopters circling high above, and Ryan was in the back with Tyler, his hand gripping the door, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "Dock 47, dead ahead," Grant said quietly. And Ryan saw it. A massive, rust-red shipping container with the words 7 Alpha stenciled on the side, suspended from a crane. Below it, a cargo ship, the Neva Star, a Russian flag visible on its stern. And standing there, as if he owned the entire port, was Cole. He wore a gray suit, arms crossed over his chest. Even from 100 yards away, the man radiated a chilling authority. He looked to be in his mid-50s, with silver hair combed back and a face so sharp it looked cruel. He wasn't by himself. 6 men holding what looked like AK-47s stood with him, not hiding, just waiting in the open, completely at ease. Agent Peterson cut the engine 200 yards away as the rest of the FBI convoy fanned out, creating a sealed perimeter. Ryan watched as agents flooded from the vehicles, disappearing into the shadows cast by stacks of containers and heavy equipment. He counted at least 50 of them, all armed to the teeth, moving with the fluid, deadly grace of a predator. Agent Grant spoke into his earpiece. "Coast Guard confirms position. The bay is sealed. Nothing gets past them?" Peterson just nodded. "Snipers. 3 teams in place. They have eyes on every target." Ryan leaned closer to the window, his breath misting the glass. He saw one of Cole's men holding a small black device, a single red button glowing on its surface. A cold dread washed over him. "Is that what I think it is?" he whispered. "C4 detonator," Grant confirmed, his voice flat. "If we make a move, he could blow this whole pier sky high." Agent Peterson took a megaphone and stepped out of the SUV. Ryan and Tyler stayed inside, their eyes fixed on the scene unfolding. Peterson walked forward alone, stopping at the edge of the light. He raised the megaphone to his lips. "Cole, this is the FBI. You are surrounded by 50 federal agents, the Coast Guard, and Sniper Overwatch. Put your weapons on the ground and surrender now." His voice boomed across the concrete, echoing off the steel containers. Cole only tilted his head, a look of mild curiosity on his face. Then he looked up at the sky where 3 helicopters were now descending, their searchlights converging to trap him in a blinding white glare. He glanced toward the water, where 2 Coast Guard ships had their spotlights trained on the Neva Star. For a long, stretched-out moment, the entire world seemed to be holding its breath. Then, Cole smiled. It was a terrifyingly empty gesture. He let the handgun he was holding fall from his fingers, and it clattered loudly on the pavement. He slowly, deliberately raised both of his empty hands. "I surrender," he called out, his voice smooth and unbothered. But the man beside him, younger, with a panicked look in his eyes, wasn't following the script. This was Caleb, Cole's top lieutenant. He was the one holding the C4 detonator, his thumb hovering frantically over the red button. "Boss, no!" Caleb shouted. "We can still—" "Caleb," Cole said, his tone chillingly calm. "It is finished. No! Caleb screamed, raising the device, his thumb coming down hard. A single sharp crack of a rifle shot split the night. And Caleb's hand, as Ryan watched in horror, simply disintegrated in a spray of red. It all came apart with a single sharp crack and a splash. The detonator was in the water, and one of Victor Orloff's men was on his knees, screaming, staring at the raw, bloody stump where his hand had been just a second before. Sniper shot confirmed. A voice crackled over an FBI radio. Target is down. Detonator is wet. And then they moved in. I'm told 20 agents swarmed that dock, a wave of tactical gear and raised weapons. Orlov, the man at the center of it all, didn't even move. He just stood there while his whole world collapsed. His guards hit the deck, and in less than 60 seconds, it was over. All of them were cuffed, the only sound being the screams of the man on the ground as a medic rushed to save his life. Agent Miller walked onto the dock, his demeanor as cold and gray as the water. He stopped in front of the notorious crime lord. Victor Orlov, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, running a counterfeit currency operation, and terrorism, he said, the words hanging in the salt air. Orlov just stared back with cold, dead eyes. Nearby, Agent Davis pried open the doors of a big red shipping container. Inside, my source said, were just endless rows of cardboard boxes. Davis sliced one open. It was filled with shrink-wrapped stacks of $100 bills. All fake, he confirmed. 2,000 boxes, that's $200 million in funny money. Miller barely looked, just told his team to lock it all down. I want every single bill counted as evidence, Miller commanded. Yes, sir, was the unified reply. It was only then that Madison Clark got out of the SUV, with her brother Connor right by her side. She watched as agents pushed Orloff into an armored van. Just before the door slammed shut, his eyes found hers, and he smiled a chilling, knowing smile. The door closed, and he was gone. The injured man was loaded into an ambulance, his screams now muffled. Agent Miller walked back over to Madison, his face etched with exhaustion and relief. It's over, he told her softly. Orlov is in custody. The whole counterfeit ring is dead. We seized $200 million. For the first time in months, Madison could finally breathe. She felt her knees start to buckle, but Connor was there, a steady hand on her shoulder. We did it, she whispered. He just nodded. Justice. That's when Agent Davis hurried over, holding up a tablet. Miller, you need to see this. Orlov's phone, encrypted messages to Ryan, Haley, and Warren Hayes, pay stubs, instructions, everything. It connects every last one of them. It's an airtight case. A grim smile touched Miller's lips. Good. Get it to the prosecutor. I want charges filed by morning. He then turned to Madison. We'll need your testimony, probably in about 5 months. Can you handle that? She met his gaze and nodded. Yes, I'll be there. Agent Miller offered her his hand. Thank you. You were incredibly brave. Your father would be proud. As Madison and Connor walked away, the dock was a blur of official activity under the sweep of helicopter lights. Driving off, she took one last look at Dock 47, where the empty red container's secrets were now spilled into the open. It was over, but the hardest part was about to begin. The United States District Court was a media circus. Every seat was filled with reporters nearly climbing over each other for a better view. Madison saw people she had known for years, and there, in the front row, was the family of Tyler Peterson, the innocent man her husband Ryan had murdered. His widow, Sarah, held her 7-year-old daughter's hand, the little girl's face a heartbreakingly blank slate. Madison sat with the prosecutor, Connor right behind her for support. It was March 15th, 2025. 5 long months since that night on the docks. 5 months of hell. The bailiff's voice cut through the anxious buzz. All rise. The Honorable Judge Patricia Albright presiding. Everyone stood as the judge, a sharp woman in her 60s, took her seat. Be seated, Judge Albright instructed. A side door opened, and they were let in. 6 defendants in orange jumpsuits, chained and shackled. Ryan came first, her husband. He wouldn't even look at her, his face a mask of stone. Behind him was Haley, her eyes red and puffy. Then came her brother Caleb, pale and trembling. Megan Hayes walked in with a defiant tilt to her chin, while her father, former Deputy Warren Hayes, just looked utterly broken. And finally, Victor Orlov, looking as calm as if he were walking into a business meeting. They took their seats, surrounded by their lawyers. We are here for the sentencing in the matter of the United States versus Ryan Clark and co-defendants. The judge began. D.A. Martinez, a sharp woman in a Navy suit, stood to read the charges. Ryan Clark, first-degree murder in the death of Tyler Peterson. Conspiracy to commit murder in the attempted killing of Madison Clark, counterfeiting $47 million, money laundering, obstruction of justice. Each word landed like a physical blow on Madison. Haley Vance, accomplice to murder, conspiracy, counterfeiting. Caleb Vance, accessory after the fact, obstruction. Megan Hayes, forgery, conspiracy, fraud. Warren Hayes, accepting bribes, obstruction, evidence tampering. And Victor Orlov, violations of the RICO Act, counterfeiting $200 million in U.S. currency, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder. D.A. Martinez finished and looked at the judge. Your Honor, the prosecution requests the maximum sentence for all of them. Judge Albright nodded slowly. The court will now hear the victim impact statement. Mrs. Clark, please approach the stand. Madison felt her legs turn to cement. Connor squeezed her hand one last time as she rose and walked to the podium. She had a statement written, but she knew she wouldn't need it. The words were already burned into her soul. My source told me that when Madison Clark spoke, her words filled every corner of that silent courtroom. She looked right at her husband, Ryan, but he just stared straight ahead, refusing to meet her eyes. Her voice, though trembling at first, found its strength. He didn't just betray me, she said. He murdered an innocent man, Tyler Peterson, a 28-year-old father who was just trying to provide for his family. She told the court how Ryan had forged her own father's will to steal from a children's hospital, and then, her voice hardening, she said, "And he planned to kill me as casually as ordering a cup of coffee." She wanted him to know the truth had won, that justice was served, and his money couldn't save him from what he'd done. Then she turned to Tyler's widow. Sarah Peterson was weeping quietly, holding her daughter close. Madison looked directly at her. And Tyler Peterson deserved better. His family deserves peace, and I hope this gives them some of that. Patty. When she finished, she nearly fell back into her seat, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Agent Miller was there to steady her. Judge Albright then addressed the defendants. Does anyone wish to make a statement? Ryan's lawyer made a move to stand, but Ryan's voice was ice. Sit down. The lawyer sat. No one else spoke. Very well, the judge said, picking up her papers. Ryan Clark, you have been found guilty on all counts for the murder of Tyler Peterson and the conspiracy to commit the murder of Madison Clark. I sentence you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. A ripple went through the courtroom, but Ryan didn't so much as blink. Caleb Vance, you are sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Caleb collapsed, his head in his hands, his body racked with sobs. Haley Vance, due to your cooperation, I sentence you to 6 years in federal prison. You will be eligible for parole after 4. Haley just shut her eyes as tears streamed down her face. Megan Hayes, you are sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Megan's expression never changed. Warren Hayes, you are sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The former deputy finally looked up, his face a portrait of despair. He seemed to mouth an apology, but no sound escaped his lips. Victor Orlov, for your extensive criminal enterprise, I sentence you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Orlov simply offered a small, detached smile, as if this were the only outcome he'd ever expected. Judge Albright raised her gavel. Additionally, all seized assets, including the $200 million in counterfeit currency and the $8.5 million from the sale of Ashford Vineyard, will be turned over to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, as stipulated in the original will of Michael Clark. Madison gasped, I was told. Her father's final wish was finally being honored. The gavel came down with a deafening crack. This court is adjourned. It all happened in a blur. Bailiffs swarmed the defense table, leading them all away. Ryan walked right past Madison, not even a sideways glance in her direction. Caleb was still sobbing uncontrollably. Haley looked back just once, and her eyes met Madison's. In that brief moment, Madison saw what looked like genuine, soul-crushing regret. Then they were gone. As the room emptied, Sarah Peterson approached Madison, her little girl clinging to her hand. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. Thank you for not letting them get away with it. Madison just pulled her into a hug, and the two women stood there, two strangers bound by tragedy, holding each other up. As the courtroom doors swung shut on that part of the nightmare, I learned that Agent Davis draped a comforting arm over Madison's shoulders. My source told me he said her father would have been proud of her strength. She whispered that it was finally over, but Davis knew better. Not quite, he told her, pulling a folded document from his coat. He explained there was something she had to see, something about the real will, about the truth of what her father, Michael, wanted for her. Her confusion was plain on her face. He just guided her toward the exit, promising to explain her father's true legacy as they stepped out into the blinding sunlight, leaving the shadows behind them for one final, crucial revelation. The probate court a month later, in April of 2025, was a world away from the media circus of the criminal trial. I'm told the room was nearly silent, occupied only by Madison, Agent Davis, and a handful of lawyers. At the head of it all was Mr. Harrison, the attorney from New York, there in person this time. On the table before him lay the document that started it all, Michael Clark's actual last will and testament, dated September 1st, 2019, the very one her husband Ryan had fought so desperately to bury forever. I can only imagine the tension as the judge, a woman described to me as having kind eyes, reviewed the paperwork. She looked up, her voice clear in the quiet room. In the matter of the estate of Michael Clark, she announced, I hereby validate the original last will and testament. The forged document is declared void. She then began to read the distribution of assets. 60% of Ashford Vineyard, with a value of $5.1 million, was to go to Madison Clark. The remaining 40%, valued at $3.4 million, was bequeathed to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. After all the deceit and bloodshed, her father's real wishes were finally being honored. The judge's gavel struck the wood with a sharp crack. This estate is now settled. After the court adjourned, Mr. Harrison approached Madison to shake her hand, telling her what a good man her father had been and apologizing for how long justice took. An hour later, they were back in the sterile environment of an FBI field office. A video call was initiated, and the face of a woman in her mid-40s appeared, her lab coat bearing the St. Jude logo. Behind her, the brightly colored murals of a children's hospital were visible, the faint sounds of kids' voices echoing in the background. "Mrs. Clark," the woman began with a gentle smile, "I'm Dr. Emily Vance. Thank you for speaking with us." My source said Madison's voice was strained with emotion as she replied. Dr. Vance's expression softened with empathy. "First, I want to say how deeply sorry we are for everything you've been through. Your father's generosity is truly remarkable." She then looked at her notes. "The inheritance from your father's estate, $3.4 million, will be used to establish the Michael Clark Pediatric Cancer Research Center here at St. Jude. It will fund cutting-edge research," she went on, "into the same diseases that took the life of your stepmother, Sarah." At this, Madison reportedly began to weep silently. "Additionally," Dr. Vance said, "we are establishing the Ben Carter Memorial Fund to honor the brave young man who exposed this whole thing. His courage saved lives." She smiled. "To date, the fund has raised $2 million. With that money, we've provided treatment to 83 children with cancer, 83 families who have hope because of what Ben did." Madison was overcome, tears streaming freely as Agent Davis placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. Dr. Vance continued, telling her they'd held a ribbon-cutting ceremony just last week. "Ben's widow, Jessica, and his daughter Lily were here," she said, her own voice thick with emotion. "They wanted me to tell you how grateful they are." Jessica said, "Ben believed in doing what was right. Madison did the same. She gave my husband justice. And now, his name will save children. That's all we ever wanted." It was then that Madison broke down completely, and Agent Davis pulled her into a hug. Dr. Vance waited patiently, her own eyes glistening. When Madison could finally look at the screen again, the doctor offered a final, powerful truth. "Your father loved you very much, Madison. He wanted to leave a legacy of healing. Because you fought for the truth, that legacy will live on. We will never forget Michael Clark. We will never forget Sarah. And we will never, ever forget Ben Carter." Madison could only whisper her thanks, affirming that this was what her father wanted and what Ben deserved. After the call ended, Agent Davis leaned back, telling her, "That's it, Madison. The case is officially closed," he confirmed. "Ryan, Tyler, Ashley, all of them are serving their sentences. The counterfeit operation is gone. St. Jude has the funds. Justice has been served." Then, he slid a folder across the table toward her. Inside was the final piece of her father's legacy. The FBI was returning full ownership of Ashford Vineyard to her. The land, the house, every last vine. It was all hers. What happened next was entirely up to her. And she just stared at that folder, at the name of a place that held so much pain. Now, a blank slate for a new beginning. The damage Ryan did to her father's legacy was almost absolute, twisting it into something ugly and dark. But I'm told her friend Jake put it into perspective for her. "Your dad built this place from dirt and dreams, Madison," he said quietly. "He planted every vine himself. That vineyard was his heart, and it can be yours now, if you want it." She felt lost, asking him what she was even supposed to do with it. He gave her a sad, knowing smile. "You rebuild it, not what it was. Something new, something that honors your dad, that honors Ben, and gives you a goddamn future." When she finally opened that folder, it was all there: the deeds, the records. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a flicker of hope ignited. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do it." I learned that the lead agent, Davis, stood and offered his hand. "Good luck, Madison. You more than earned this." She shook his hand and his partner's before she and Jake walked out of that cold FBI building and into the bright April sun. The entire drive back toward Napa, she just stared out at the rolling hills, at the endless rows of vines flying past her window. Her father's dream was out there, buried beneath the wreckage Ryan had created, and she was going to dig it out. Not for the feds, and certainly not for the monsters he worked with, but for her dad, for her friend Sarah, for Ben, and for herself. It was the rebirth of Ashford Vineyard, taking place 8 months after the trial, 8 months after she first decided to fight back. On December 24th, 2025, Madison was standing at the edge of the property, watching the sunset. The place was unrecognizable. Every trace of the violence and lies had been torn from the soil itself, replaced with something that felt like hope. The old wine cellar, the headquarters for Ryan's entire counterfeit ring, was gone. They had leveled it completely. In its place now stands a beautiful 2-story building with floor-to-ceiling windows. The ground floor is now the Prohibition History Archive, a small museum dedicated to Napa's bootlegging past. Upstairs is a state-of-the-art wine vault, serving their vineyard and others in the community. But the true heart of the new Ashford, I'm told, is the tasting room they built in Ben Carter's name. Madison walked inside and flipped a switch, and the room was filled with a soft glow. On the main wall hangs a large photograph of Ben, smiling in his work clothes among the vines. A bronze plaque beneath it reads, "Ben Carter, 1994 to 2022. His courage exposed evil. His memory inspires hope." They framed the articles about the trial, the FBI commendation, and a thank you note from his parents, Mark and Laura. Every day, visitors stop and read his story, learning about the sacrifice he made right there on that land. The door opened, and Jake walked in carrying 2 wine glasses. He looks healthier these days, a world away from the man who helped Madison through the darkness. He's 11 years sober now and has never looked back. "Ready?" he asked her. She smiled. They've brought on a young couple, Liam and Olivia Thompson, both just 28 and fresh out of UC Davis, to manage production and marketing. Liam is a true artist with the blends, and Olivia has the community talking about Ashford again, but for all the right reasons. It's no longer the headquarters of a criminal empire, but an honest, small vineyard that's part of something good. Back in June, Jake and Madison flew to Ireland, to County Cork, to trace her father's family roots. They spent days in old churchyards, following the family name back 200 years. On a cliff top overlooking the Atlantic, they held a small memorial for her father, scattering wildflowers into the wind. The goodbye she was never able to have. Upon their return, they planted a California redwood next to the tasting room, a living monument for Ben. It's only about 6 feet tall now, but it will stand there for centuries. A simple bronze marker with his name at its base. That night, Jake and Madison walked out onto the porch of the main house. The air was crisp with the scent of pine, and Christmas lights twinkled along the roofline, a warm glow against the dark sky. Jake placed the glasses on a small table between their rocking chairs, and then revealed a bottle he'd been hiding behind his back. A Chateau Margaux, 1996. Bottle number 217. It was the exact vintage that had opened the secret passage to Ryan's criminal underworld. Madison couldn't help but laugh. "You kept it." "The FBI returned it as evidence," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "Figured it deserved a better story." He expertly uncorked it, pouring the deep, blood-red wine into their glasses, where it shone like liquid rubies in the soft light. Madison raised her glass. "To Ben," she said. "To my dad. To justice." Jake nodded, raising his own. "And to second chances." The glasses chimed in the quiet night, and she took a sip. As my source recounted the memory, her voice softened. She told me about a near-perfect glass of wine, a bottle aged for nearly 30 years, much like the secrets it once helped conceal. I could almost picture them, Madison and her old friend Jake, sitting together, gazing out at the skeletal vines of their family vineyard against the fading light. A solitary redwood stood in the distance, a silent witness. She recalled Jake's voice, thick with emotion, telling her, "You did good, kid. Your father would be so proud." She remembered the lump in her throat as she whispered back, "I hope so," and his firm reply, "I know so." After that, they just sipped their wine, letting the silence speak. The vineyard wasn't a crime scene anymore. It was a place of hope, memory, and a hard-won love. That quiet moment of peace, however, was born from a storm of chaos. Madison shared a note with me, one she hopes reaches others. She described how betrayal from within your own family is a wound unlike any other. I learned how her husband, Ryan, had chosen greed over their life together, pushing her to a brink where revenge felt like her only option. She spoke of finding an unexpected strength, a grace she attributes to God, and how Jake reappeared in her life precisely when she needed a guardian. The scars, she admitted, are still there. And with Ryan now out of prison, she confessed that the temptation for payback is a fire she has to fight every single day. But she knows that walking that path of vengeance would only lead to her own ruin, just as it had for Ryan. So, she chose something else. She chose justice. She chose to rebuild her world instead of letting bitterness drown her. Her warning to others is stark, a plea I feel obligated to pass on. If you sense that kind of poison brewing in your own home, you have to find the courage to confront it. You have to speak up, get help, and refuse to let your silence make you an accomplice. As she put it to me, forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about refusing to let hate consume your future. Ryan stole her trust, but he couldn't steal the rest of her life, a truth she sees every morning as the sun rises over her land. Her story forces us to ask ourselves a difficult question. How do you recover from a betrayal that profound? How do you find your way back from that kind of darkness? This account is being shared for anyone who needs to hear about resilience, about the difficult road to justice, and the possibility of redemption. It's a heavy story, I know, and as with any deeply personal account, the narrative is shaped by memory and emotion. It's one person's truth, offered in the hope that it might help someone else find theirs.